apprenticeships. And one of the things that I think has come about that's a positive from Brexit, and you know I was not a supporter of Brexit originally. I accepted the democratic will, but I wasn't a supporter. But one of the positives that I think has come out of it is that it's shown how much we had underinvested in skills and apprenticeships. And now I think companies have to step up to the plate. They have to reinstate those apprenticeships. They've got to get the training up so that we can be producing at the same level as our competitors in Europe.
Right, and as we mentioned, you've got an engineering background, and that's one of the areas where we appear to be lagging behind manufacturing and engineering and so on. So, you know, when is that going to happen in terms of a major push to really get productivity up and invest in people, as Barry was saying?
I mean, I think it's a wide issue. I think, first of all, to go back to the engineering point of view, one of the problems we've had is the maths and physics qualifications that you were doing at secondary school.
Topics,
yeah, and also they simply weren't at the level. I'll give you an example. My sister is 2 years younger than me. If she did the same A-level syllabus that I did for my A-level maths, she would have got AS Further Maths on top of that, just for doing the same syllabus. And so there was this decline. And when I worked at the University of Leeds in the engineering department, and this is at the turn of the century, and we were putting on extra maths modules then. So when we look at the overall picture of where we've got to in terms of an engineering situation, it's deeper than just apprenticeships, etc.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll be touching on the convention. As we say, they're meeting in Manchester. But the other issue, of course, that's broken this morning is the supply of tanks that Germany has now decided to actually release these Leopard 2 tanks. You were at Defence Procurement. We've got 14 Challengers going out. Now we've got the Leopard tanks. We've also got Abrams tanks. Yeah. It appears from the American. Yeah, it's a bit of a mix. However, it's a political message, I guess, to the Kremlin as well.
Well, it certainly is a political message, but it is also a battlefield requirement. And let's be under no doubt what is happening now. The Russians are using the winter to regroup and re-strategise.
Ready for a spring offensive.
Yeah, and re-strategise. And I think that's very important that we recognise that and need the equipment to tackle it.
Yeah, and in terms of Rishi Sunak, he's been at pains to say this boosts Ukraine's defensive firepower, because I guess the concern is really, you know, do you bait the Russian bear too much by putting tanks on his lawn?
Look, there's always the problem of escalating a military situation when what you need ultimately in any conflict is a diplomatic resolution. But I think it is right, because what you see now is some very well-established trenches on the Russian side. They've dug in, they are really there to stay. And the only way of punching through those defences is actually with tanks. And that's why this has been seen, I think, and accepted finally by all the leaders, that it's really important that Ukraine has that capacity. Otherwise, we are in for a much longer, drawn-about conflict, under which many, many more lives are likely to be lost.
And maybe, in terms of punching through, it's Crimea that's going to be the key to that, and you need armour on the ground to achieve that.
Yes, of course, because there the stasis is for much longer, since 2014.
OK. Mr Zahawi, let's address what is obviously concerning the Prime Minister at the moment. I mean, he has got his sort of defensive line. There's an independent investigation. I can't comment until that is concluded. The Sue Gray defence, as it's been called.
I mean, I understand it will report next week. So
oh, really?
That's what I understand, that it's going to be a very quick investigation. If it drags on and on and on, then, look, it's just inevitable he will go. If it's going to be reported next week and clears it up, then he probably will survive. He can probably do however long it is into next week. If it's going beyond that, he's not going to survive, and we all know it.
And is part of that, it's how he dealt with the issue before it became public, threatening journalists with legal action, saying he'd been smeared and so on.
Well, it's very interesting. There's an article on page 2 of the Daily Mail today that Bob Seeley, Conservative MP, has actually said that this is a sort of a, I'm not quite sure the words he used, but he was saying people who are using the law to silence criticisms is almost a...
so good, they've taken it away from the paper, however.
But it's there, and I thought it's an interesting intervention at that moment.
Yeah, and we've also got, I think, suggestions from Lord Evans criticising the approach, the chair of the Standards Committee, of course, basically saying that he's trying to close down legitimate public debate on this.
I mean, look, I think there's a line between our personal finances and then the effect. And I think the one thing that I think's come out of all of this is the complexity of tax law.
Yeah.
And in the 13, 14 years I've been there, and I think in Barry's government time, we all said, we're going to simplify the tax code, and whatever happens is more gets added to it.
More complex. Yeah. Now, this would seem an open goal for Keir Starmer, but as we've seen previously, he does sometimes come at an oblique angle. Is there a danger that he could just kick the ball over the top of the bar?
If I were Keir Starmer this lunchtime, I think I would be asking the Prime Minister whether he had ever set up an offshore account. I would be asking whether he'd ever done it carelessly, and I would be asking whether he had ever been forced into paying not just a penalty, not just a fine, but a penalty on top.
So turning it on to the Prime Minister's own tax position is...
No, it's not about that. It's the credibility of this whole thing.
Right.
If you're the Chancellor, you should not be using an offshore trust, right? First and foremost, you should be paying all of your tax in the UK as a responsible citizen. You should then actually not be in a position where the HMRC are telling you that you have made a serious error. That's what carelessness is. It's short of negligence, but it's carelessness, and it then has a penalty between, 9 and 30%.
And this appears to be at the top of that.
And if the reports are true that it's a 30% penalty, then it's only just short of being negligent, and that would be an offence.
Yeah, which is a bit more than being careless. Yeah. And what about this issue, tax affairs should be personal and private?
Well, I think that is true, because I think that we're private citizens, but this has obviously exploded out into the media. And look, I mean, Barry's made some points there, but we don't actually know what went on. And I suppose when you get a big story like this, it's just that I assume that's what the investigation's going to do.
We're just about to launch. PMQ's underway. Here we are at the Commons.
Start by wishing everyone a happy Burns night, especially to those celebrating in Scotland. And, Mr. Speaker, as we prepare to mark Holocaust Memorial Day, I'm sure the whole House will join me in paying tribute to the extraordinary courage of Britain's Holocaust survivors, including 94-year-old Arik Hirsch, who is with us here today. This government will legislate to build the Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre next to Parliament, so the testimonies of survivors like Arik will be heard at the heart of our democracy by every generation to come. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Shockingly, 1 in 6 women in the UK have experienced economic abuse. This is not just about money, but the restricting of access to other resources like food, housing or work. It's the lesser-known aspects of coercive control. It affects my constituents, the Prime Minister's constituents, and every member across this House. What plans does the Prime Minister have to review in detail government departments and policies, the way that government departments and policies can be exploited by abusers to ensure that these loopholes can be closed?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady raises an important point, and let me assure her that this government is committed to tackling violence against women and girls. That's why we passed the landmark Domestic Abuse Bill, introduced new offences, for example, coercion, coercive control, stalking and others, and will continue to do everything we can to ensure women and girls feel as safe as they deserve and rightly should be.
Michael Longett. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While I was disappointed that Dudley did not make the final cut in the latest Levelling Up funding round, I am, of course, pleased that we received the £25 million Towns deal, the brand new Duncan Edwards leisure facility, and a transport interchange project secured since my election in 2019. But But our high street, Mr. Speaker, is on its knees. So will the Prime Minister meet with me and Dudley Council to discuss our levelling up bid and how we can ensure success in the next round?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is a great advocate for his constituents. And I'm delighted that, thanks to his efforts, Dudley has received £25 million from the Towns Fund. I know there will be disappointment about the Levelling Up Fund, but all bids, including that made by Dudley Council, can receive feedback to strengthen their bid for future rounds of funding, and I would be very happy to meet him further to discuss.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week we will remember the 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust and all those scarred by genocide since, as we mark Holocaust Memorial Day. We must all commit across this House to defeat prejudice and hatred wherever we may find it. To work for a better future, we must find light in the darkness. I can also join the Prime Minister in wishing everyone a happy Burns night. Mr. Speaker, Zara Alina was walking home from a night out with her friends when she was savagely attacked, assaulted and beaten to death. Zara was a brilliant young woman, a trainee lawyer with a bright future. Her killer is a violent, racist, woman-hating thug, not fit to walk the same streets. No. But that's precisely the problem. He was free to walk the same streets. The inspectorate report into her case says that opportunities were missed by the probation service that could have prevented this attack and saved her life. Does the Prime Minister accept those findings?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this was a truly terrible crime. And as the Chief Inspector has found, the failings in this case, and indeed others, were serious and indeed unacceptable. In both of the cases that are in the public domain, these failures can be traced to failings in the initial risk assessment, and that's why immediate steps are being taken to address the serious issues raised.
Keir Starmer.
I'm glad he accepts those findings. The report also says that staffing vacancies and excessive workloads contributed to those fatal failures. And it makes absolutely clear this was not a one-off. As the report says, these are systemic issues in the probation service. They're clearly ministerial responsibilities. Does the Prime Minister accept those findings as well?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me outline for the honourable gentleman exactly what steps we are taking, and that's to ensure that mandatory training to improve risk assessments is being put in place. It's mandating checks with the police and children's services before a probation officer can recommend to the court that a convicted offender be given electronically monitored offence, and implementing new processes to guarantee the swift recall of offenders. And the action we are taking is already making a difference, as, for example, we see in the reduction of the number of electronically monitored curfews being given by the courts.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, it was Barking, Dagenham and Havering that tragically and fatally let Zara down. But across the country, probation services are failing. After a botched, then reversed privatisation, after a decade of underinvestment, it's yet another vital public service on its knees after 13 years of Tory government. I spoke to Zara's family this morning. It's hard to convey to this House the agony that they've been through. They say that the government has blood on their hands over these failings. He's accepted the findings of the report. Does he also accept what Zara's family say?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my heart, of course, goes out to Zara's family. He mentioned accountability. The probation services has taken action where failings have been found and where that has been appropriate. And with regard to the overall service, because of the extra investment we're putting in, there's now £155 million a year being put into the probation service so that we can deliver better supervision of offenders. there's also been an increase in the number of senior probation officers. But one of the other things we must remember, Mr. Speaker, if we do want to increase the safety of women and girls out on our streets, that we need tough sentencing. And that's why this government passed the Police Crime and Sentencing Act, which the honourable gentleman opposite and his party opposed.
It's on the law. Look what's happened. It's already law.
In light of the case of Zara, I really don't think the Prime Minister should be boasting about the protection that he's putting in place for women. And I'm not going to take lectures from him about that. Does the Prime Minister agree that any politician who seeks to avoid the taxes they owe in this country is not fit to be in charge of taxpayer money?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to make my position on this matter completely clear to the House. The issues in question occurred before I was Prime Minister. With regard to the appointment of the Minister without portfolio, the usual appointments process was followed. No issues were raised with me when he was appointed to his current role. And since I commented on this matter last week, more information has come forward. And that is why I have asked the independent advisor to look into the matter. Now, I obviously can't prejudge the outcome of that, but it is right that we fully investigate this matter and establish all the facts.
Mr. Speaker, he avoided the question. I think anybody watching would think it's fairly obvious that someone who seeks to avoid tax can't also be in charge of tax. Yet, for some reason, the Prime Minister can't bring himself to say that or even acknowledge the question. Now, last week, the Prime Minister told this House that the chair of the Tory party had addressed his tax affairs in full, and there was nothing to add. This week, after days of public pressure, the Prime Minister now says there are serious questions to answer. What changed?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I know he reads from these prepared sheets, but he should listen to what I actually say. Since I commented on this matter last week, more information, including a statement by the Minister without portfolio, has entered the public domain, which is why it's right that we do establish the facts. And Mr. Speaker, let me take a step back. Now, of course, the politically expedient thing to do would be for me to have said that this matter must have been resolved by Wednesday at noon. But I believe in proper due process. That's why I appointed an independent advisor, and that's why the independent advisor is doing his job. But the opposition can't have it both ways. The shadow leader, also his party chair, both urged me and the government to appoint an independent advisor. And now he objects to that independent advisor doing their job. It's simple political opportunism, and everyone can see through it.
We all know why the Prime Minister was reluctant to ask his party chair questions about family finances and tax avoidance. His failure to sack him when the whole country can see what's going on shows how hopelessly weak he is. A Prime Minister overseeing chaos, overwhelmed at every turn. He can't say when ambulances will get to heart attack victims again. He can't say when the prison system will keep streets safe again. He can't even deal with tax avoiders in his own cabinet. Is he starting to wonder if this job is just too big for him?
Mr. Speaker, the difference between him and me is that I stand by my values and my principles even when it is difficult. When I disagreed fundamentally with the previous Prime Minister, I resigned from the government. But for four long years, he sat next to the member for Islington North. When anti-Semitism ran rife, when his predecessor sided with our opponents, that's what's weak, Mr. Speaker. He has no principles and just petty politics.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. For our most vulnerable children, school is often their principal place of safety as well as education. But as reported in my review of school exclusions for the government in 2019, the unacceptable and illegal use of off-rolling is still shutting a worrying number of children out of the classroom, out of learning and out of the protection they need from gangs, violence and domestic abuse. And whilst there has been some impressive and excellent work done by the Department of Education to address this terrible practice, what more can my right honourable friend do to ensure that we now permanently exclude off-rolling from our schools?
Prime Minister.
Well, my honourable friend raises an important issue, and the government is clear that off-rolling is unlawful and unacceptable in any form. And the Department for Education continues to work with Ofsted to tackle it. Where Ofsted finds it, it will always be addressed in the inspection report, and it could also lead to a school's leadership being judged inadequate.
We now come to Leader of the SNP, Stephen King.
Mr. Speaker, let me start by echoing the sentiments of the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition in relation to Holocaust Memorial Day. Truly horrific crimes that we must never forget and endeavour to ensure are never repeated. May I also send my heartfelt thoughts, and indeed I hope those of all across the Chamber, to the firefighter who's in serious condition in Edinburgh at this moment in time following the blaze in Edinburgh just a few days ago. Mr. Speaker, may I ask the Prime Minister, what advice would he have for individuals seeking to protect their personal finances? Should they seek out a future chair of the BBC to help secure an £800,000 loan? Should they set up a trust in Gibraltar and hope that HMRC simply don't notice? Or should they do as others have done and simply apply for non-dom status?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me share with the honourable gentleman expressing my sympathies to the families and indeed the firefighter who's currently in hospital. I'm sorry to hear that and wish him a speedy recovery. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud of the record of this government is supporting the most vulnerable in our society. Just this winter, helping all families £900 with their energy bills, raising the national living wage to record levels and ensuring that our pensioners get the support they need. That's what this government is doing to ensure financial security in this country.
I'm not sure what question the Prime Minister thought I asked, but that certainly was not it, Mr. Speaker. But let's be clear about this. This is now a matter of the Prime Minister's own integrity and accountability. After all, when there was questions about the Home Secretary, the Secretary, and concerns about her role in relation to national security, he chose to back her. Now the chair of the Tory party, he's choosing to back him despite a £5 million penalty from HMRC. And of course, he's seeking to protect the former Prime Minister despite his cosy financial relationship with the chair of the BBC. Is it little wonder that people in Scotland may well just consider the Tory party to be a parcel of rogues?
Mr. Speaker, what I'm standing up for is proper due process. That's why we have an independent advisor. It's right that the independent advisor conducts his investigation. That's how we will ensure accountability, and that's what I will deliver.
Rob Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Wales has almost 40 times more people than England waiting more than 2 years for NHS treatment, despite having less than 5% of the population. Sad case of devolve and forget, unfortunately, which does a disservice to my constituents in Delyn. Could the Prime Minister confirm that the UK government remains concerned about the healthcare of the people in Wales? And given that the North Wales Health Board has had it for 8 years, could he come up with a way of putting the Welsh Labour government into special measures?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the honourable gentleman highlights, the NHS right across our union is facing pressure because of some of the challenges of flu and COVID in particular, causing high bed occupancy this winter. We are focused on delivering on the people's priorities and bringing down the backlog. We've currently already eliminated waits of over 2 years, and as the honourable gentleman says, there's more to go. That's why our investment this week into mental health treatment will ensure that we can ease the pressure further in A&E, and I continue to delivering that across the country.
Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I echo the comments of the Prime Minister in relation to Holocaust Memorial Day? And as we think of the situation in Ukraine, we also extend our best wishes to President Zelensky on his birthday today. Freedom of religion or belief is important in this country. Isabel von Spruce was praying silently outside an abortion clinic in Birmingham when she was arrested and questioned by the police, not about her written or spoken words, but about her thoughts. We value freedom of religion or belief in this country. Will the Prime Minister commit to examine the laws of the United Kingdom to ensure that this country remains a beacon for freedom of religion or belief across the world?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Of course, we believe in freedom of religious expression and belief in this country, but we also are balancing that with the rights of women to seek legal and safe abortions. That is currently being discussed in this Parliament. These matters are always matters of free vote, and I know members will treat them with the sensitivity that they deserve.
Dr. Liam Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Innocent civilians are being murdered in Ukraine on Putin's orders as we speak, and as we see in a warmed House of Commons, families are freezing because their electricity is being cut off by Russian forces. Putin believes that Ukraine is more important to him than the free world and is moving to a full war footing. So the Ukrainians must make gains on the battlefield, and the next 6 months are crucial. They need a full range of weapons, Mr. Speaker: air defence, artillery, longer range missiles and tanks, and enough to make a real difference. The UK has shown great leadership on this issue. Can I ask, therefore, my right honourable friend to use every means at his disposal, domestic and international, to honour the courage of the people of Ukraine and to defend the whole world order, because ultimately that is what we're really talking about.
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've made clear that the UK and our allies must accelerate our efforts to ensure Ukraine wins this war and secures a lasting peace. Last year, the United Kingdom provided £2.3 billion in military aid to Ukraine, the largest package of support of any European nation, and we will at least match that again this year. And as my right honourable friend knows, last week I announced that we would gift many battle tanks as part of the next major package of UK support to Ukraine, and I'm pleased that our friends and allies are preparing to follow our lead.
Dr. Rupert.
Mr. Speaker, London has it all: prime property, shopping, schools, even the perfect time zone for money laundering. And while there has been movement with Russian oligarchs, it's not just them. We know that there are relatives of regimes that we all condemn on both sides of this House that are running bogus Islamic centres just as fronts to stash their dirty cash, amongst other things. So when will the NCA be adequately financed so we can be a world leader in anti-corruption, as we promised in 2016? Or is there a lack of political will to upset the apple cart?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable lady should know that we're currently in the process of legislating the Economic Crime Bill, which puts in place many more measures to allow us to tackle some of the issues that she raised, and also introduces the Economic Crime Levy, which will provide considerably more funding to tackle economic crime in the UK.
Sir McCartney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Trans-Pennine Rail upgrade is underway, which is good news, with stations in Slough and Marsden getting improvements. But what's not such good news, Mr. Speaker, is the dozens of daily rail service cancellations by Trans-Pennine Express, which is causing absolute misery for my constituents, trying to get to work, trying to get to college, trying to visit family and friends. The franchise is up in May, Mr. Speaker. So does the Prime Minister agree with me? Enough is enough. If Trans-Pennine Express don't get to grips with this, we need to strip them of the franchise and get somebody in who will deliver the reliable rail services for my constituents.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have been clear that the current service is simply not acceptable. Rail North Partnership is working with a company on a service improvement plan, and my honourable friend, the Rail Minister, is having weekly meetings with them. As the honourable gentleman points out, Trans-Pennine Express contract does expire in May, and whilst there are currently discussions about that new contract, if ministers conclude that the operator cannot be turned around, then other decisions may be made.
Olivia Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. From Rwanda to deaths in the Channel and the latest scandal of missing children, refugees and campaigners have today gathered outside Parliament to highlight the impact of the hostile environment on people in the migration and asylum system. Rather than cruel gimmicks like Rwanda, isn't the best way of deterring channel crossings, saving lives and breaking the business model of criminal gangs to introduce safe and legal routes to claim asylum?
Well, Mr. Speaker, this just is about fairness. It's about fairness for those that seek to come here legally. It's about fairness for those who are here and our ability to integrate and support those who we want to. What we will do is break the cycle of criminal gangs, which are causing untold misery, leading to deaths in the Channel. And that's why we will introduce legislation that makes it clear that if you come here illegally, we will be able to detain you and swiftly remove you to a safe third country. That is the reasonable and common sense approach that the vast majority of the British public supports.
The Prime Minister will be aware of my concern that mental health patients should not be forced into accident and emergency departments when what they really need is specialist care. Can he say more about the extra money that's being made available for urgent mental health care facilities, and also what impact he thinks that'll have, first on the treatment of mental health patients, but also on the general situation in A&E departments?
Prime Minister.
My right honourable friend is absolutely right. People in mental health crisis deserve compassionate care in a safe and appropriate setting, and too often they end up in A&E when they should be receiving specialist treatment elsewhere. This week's announcement is in mental health ambulances, crisis cafes, crisis houses, and mental health urgent treatment centres. Will make sure that patients do get the vital help they need whilst easing pressures on emergency departments and freeing up staff time. My honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight this issue. Our announcement this week will make a major difference.
As a trustee of the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, this week, I was honoured to hear from Leah Lesser, a Holocaust survivor who came to this country by herself at the age of 8 because her parents believed that the UK was a safe haven for vulnerable children. This week, I also read the government's own statistics, which said that there are 200 asylum-seeking, unaccompanied children who are missing from hotels in the UK. Ministers have admitted that they have no idea about the whereabouts of these children. So could I ask the Prime Minister, does he still think that the UK is a safe haven for vulnerable children?
Mr. Speaker, the United Kingdom has opened up its hearts and homes to hundreds of thousands of people over the last few years, from Syria, from Afghanistan, from Ukraine, from Hong Kong, and provided refuge and sanctuary to many children in that process. But the reports that we have read about are concerning. Local authorities have a statutory duty to protect all children, regardless of where they go missing from. And in that situation, they work closely with the local agencies, including the police, to establish their whereabouts. And that's why it's so important that we end the use of hotels for unaccompanied asylum seekers and reduce pressure on the overall system. That's what our plans will do.
James Duddridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Constituents in Southend and Rochford very much welcome the energy bill support scheme that's helped 99% of households around the United Kingdom with rising fuel prices despite Putin's barbaric war in Ukraine. Can the Prime Minister assure my constituents and indeed this House that he's committed to continue helping with the cost of living, not only this winter, but next winter?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right about this government's commitment to support all families with the cost of living. This winter, around £900 of support, but next year, as the energy price guarantee evolves, it will still be there to support families with around £500 of support. And this comes on top of record increases in the national living wage, worth about £1,600, and supporting our pensioners and the most vulnerable by inflating their benefits and pensions with inflation.
Clive Atherton.
In 2021, the government enabled Yevgeny Prigozhin, former chef to Putin and founder of Wagner, to dodge UK sanctions to pursue a case in London against British journalist Elliot Higgins, who had exposed Prigozhin's link to Wagner. Prigozhin believed that silencing Higgins would get his sanctions lifted. The overriding of UK sanctions was approved by the Treasury when the Prime Minister was Chancellor. Prigozhin's English lawyers wrote that serving notice on Higgins, and I quote, will require Treasury approval. So what values did the Prime Minister apply when he allowed a Putin warlord to use our courts to try to silence a British journalist and undermine UK sanctions?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm proud of our record in leading, actually, when it comes to sanctioning those people connected with the Putin regime. I think at last count we've sanctioned over 1,000 people and frozen tens of billions of pounds of assets. I am aware of the case he's raised. We are looking at it. But there is, as he knows, OFSI, who deal with the licensing situations in these matters. But I'm happy to get back to him on the specific case that he raised.
Nicola Richards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I echo my right honourable friend's comments on the importance of Holocaust Memorial Day and welcome his renewed commitment today regarding the Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre. Will the Prime Minister join me in encouraging members from across the House to sign the Holocaust Educational Trust Book of Commitment, which will be in Parliament today and tomorrow, pledging to remember the Holocaust, fight anti-Semitism and to support the important work of the Holocaust Educational Trust?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend, and as I said earlier, we will legislate to help build the Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre next to Parliament to serve as a powerful reminder of the Holocaust, its victims, and where prejudice can lead if unchallenged. I also join her in thanking the Holocaust Educational Trust for their fantastic work, and I join my honourable friend in encouraging all members to sign the Book of Commitment, as I will be doing later today.
Andy Slaughter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A week ago, my constituent, Ali Reza Akbari, was executed by order of the regime in Iran. In the 3 years preceding and the days following his murder, the UK government made little effort to protect the life or protest the death of a British national. Tomorrow, Mr. Akbari's family and I meet the Foreign Office Minister. They want to hear what help the government can offer them at this time of their greatest suffering. Today, this House wants to hear from the Prime Minister what sanction he will impose on the regime beyond the trifling steps taken so far. First and foremost, will he show some courage, follow the lead of the United States and the European Parliament, and prescribe the entire Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organisation?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the regime is prolonging the suffering of the family, and it is sadly typical of their disregard for basic human dignity. I've spoken before about my views in Iran when I was before the Liaison Committee, and Iran must now provide answers about the circumstances of his death and his burial. We have actually pressed the Iranian regime formally through their chargé d'affaires in London and the Foreign Ministry in Tehran, and will continue to do so until the family get the answers they deserve, and have sanctioned several members connected with the case.
Redcliffe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister and the Chancellor for visiting Hambden and Haslingden just last week to hear about the transformative difference that the Levelling Up funding will make. This is a historic investment with over £40 million secured. So does he agree with me that we're delivering on exactly what was promised in 2019 to the areas that were forgotten the most, like Hambden and Haslingden? And will he visit once works are completed to see the difference himself?
Well, my honourable friend is a fantastic champion for her local community, and the results showed when the Chancellor and I were lucky to visit her last week. And as she pointed out, and as did many of the people that we spoke to, this was an area that had been forgotten, neglected for decades, but it's this government that is putting in the investment, spreading opportunity, making jobs and making sure that people can feel enormously pride of the place that they call home.
Sherman.
Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister realise that most people in my constituency think it's his role to keep our country safe? Yeah. Is he aware that in all those years I've been in Parliament, I have never heard a situation where our army and armed forces are so run down that the chairman of the Defence Select Committee and the Secretary of State for Defence both say our armed forces have been hollowed out and are unfit to put a division into active service. What's he going to do about that?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman seems to forget the fact that we've invested an extra £24 billion in our armed forces services. It's a record uplift in defence spending, ensures that we are one of the leading spenders on defence in NATO, and we will continue to ensure that we have one of the best equipped fighting forces anywhere in the world. And as we can see by the recent announcement on tanks, we continue to lead the world when it comes to standing up for not just our safety, but the safety of our allies around the world.
Sir Michael Penning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as a former firefighter, the whole House will pray for the firefighter that's fighting for his life in Scotland today. Our emergency services go one way into the danger while we come the other way, and our thoughts and prayers should be with them. On a separate note, Prime Minister, the Cornwall Borough Council, the Conservative-led council in my constituency, have done a fantastic job in building new houses, social housing and council houses. Can the Prime Minister assure me that we're not going to be pushed into Green Belt any more than we have already, and we can protect the children in my constituency?
Yeah. Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman, and I join him in praising his local council for ensuring that we build homes in the right places and make sure that our young people can fulfil the dream of home ownership. But he's also right to say that this government will always protect our precious green spaces, and the recent changes to our planning reforms will ensure that we can protect the green belt everywhere, and his local community and others will benefit from those protections as we keep our local areas beautiful.
Martin Day.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. UK and a Changing Europe has reported that at the end of 2022, 60% of voters said their cost of living had increased and 38% that their personal finances had been negatively affected from not being a member of the European Union. While OBR forecasts a 4% reduction in GDP, only 2/5 of which have already happened. Surely the Prime Minister would agree with me, with the electorate and the experts, that Brexit has only served to exacerbate cost of living and economic challenging facing these islands.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Russia's illegal war in Ukraine and the impact it's had on energy supplies has nothing to do with Brexit, Mr. Speaker. But what we are doing is ensuring that we can support families with those cost of living pressures. That's why we provided £900 of support this winter with energy bills. That's why we're increasing the national living wage to record levels. And we will continue to stand behind Britain's families until we can bring inflation back down to where it belongs.
Virginia Crawlston.
Mr. Speaker, I know the Prime Minister will share my concerns at the news this morning that 730 people may lose their jobs at the Two Sisters chicken factory in Llangefni, one of the largest employers on Ynys Môn. What support can the government offer to both my constituents who are affected by this devastating news and the wider community at this difficult time?
Mr. Speaker, I'm very sorry to hear about the job losses that the Honourable Lady raises. My thoughts are with those affected and their families. I know how distressing that will be for them. I'm pleased to say that DWP has procedures in place to support communities when situations like this arise, and we will work very closely with her to do what we are doing everywhere across the country, and that's provide good, well-paid jobs for everyone, because that is the best way to build a happy and secure life.
Caroline Barris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Exercise is essential for both physical and mental well-being, but with spiral energy costs, many venues, like the Freedom Leisure Centres in my constituency, are struggling to cope. While some sectors will receive extra support, the sport and leisure industry will not. If the Prime Minister agrees with me that this sector is vital to the long-term health of our communities, why is his government not providing them with the financial support they need to thrive?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course I agree with the Honourable Lady that exercise and leisure centres are important, and that's why we provided significant support to them during COVID and beyond. And with regard to energy prices now, the Chancellor has set out the new relief scheme that will run after the current one expires. It provides considerable support to all sorts of organisations up and down the country, and I'm sure it will benefit many businesses and organisations in her constituency.
I understand that the case referred to by the Right Honourable Member for Lagan Valley is currently before the courts. It is therefore covered by the House's sub judice resolution and should not be referred to in this House. It is, of course, open to any member to ask I waive the resolution in particular case, but that has not happened in this case, and so therefore should not be discussed at all. I'm going to leave it at that. Right. Sends PMQs before I call the urgent.
So that was Prime Minister's questions. We did get to the Zahawi tax case eventually, but as we were discussing with Barry Gardner and Alex Shelbrooke before the session started, an oblique line of attack, perhaps the way to describe it, from the Labour leader, Keir Starmer. An indication yet again that he was wanting to go in on what he saw as a weak spot, and this is this whole issue of the probation service, a personal case that involved. We could hear the House going very quiet, but then this build-up, almost as if he was presenting a case in court, before then getting to the fact that, you know, this is indicative of 13 years of breakdown in public services.
Look, Mark, you summed it up perfectly. I think it was right. This is a case that has obviously disturbed everyone in this country over the past week as we've read what happened and read about the failings of the probation service. But as Keir Starmer said, this is an endemic failure throughout the service. That's what the report said. It's not just an isolated case. Important though that would be to identify what had gone wrong, what they said
Which
is
the
that
inspector did, of course.
Indeed, absolutely, very comprehensive. But actually then went on to say, but this is not an isolated case, it's happening all across the country. And that is what is, I think, such a powerful attack on the government, that he was able to say to Rishi Sunak, look, this is the result of 13 years of underfunding, not just this public services, but actually public services as a whole, the National Health Service,
the NHS in particular,
no care service yet in sight. All the public services being underfunded is leading to systematic problems.
Yeah. Now, Rishi Sunak came back saying, you know, we need tough sentencing, which Labour has opposed, but it led to a bit of an opening for Keir Starmer to come back at him. The Prime Minister should not be boasting about the protection for women. A bit uncomfortable for the Prime Minister.
Well, I mean, the blunt truth is that when the bill on sentencing crime came through, it was just opposed all the way, and there was legislation set out in that to try and make certainly some of the sex crimes, etc., easier to prosecute, and of course give longer sentences too. And of course, in politics, it is a lot of smoke and mirrors, and of course the political argy-bargy. But it is a shame that there are certain issues where the House can't come together, because we hear about it time and time again. If you want to do this, we'll back you. But when it comes to it, it doesn't happen. And I think it then gets kicked about. But the reality is there are plenty of examples of people who have not had significant sentencing, and that was one of the things that had to change.
Yeah, although obviously Starmer pointing to a botched and then reverse privatisation in terms of the probation service itself. But, I mean, the nub of what you're saying is, of course, where Sunak was talking about principle, not just petty politics. But, I mean, that basically was perhaps a charge to both sides today.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I think the Prime Minister, it's all very well Starmer was saying that it was weak about Zahawi, but actually I think it is stronger to say, hang on a minute, no matter what bricks and bats you're going to throw at me, I'm just going to wait until I've got this report, rather than running after the lynch squad.
I believe in proper due process.
Proper due process. And I think it's actually harder to allow time to play out and do those things than just give in and say, sacked.
Right. However, can they smell blood in the water? Because we heard the reaction, of course, in his terms of his defence about letting the due process go through. The opposition benches were pretty vocal at that point.
I think the significant thing was this. The Prime Minister constantly referred to Nadeem Zahawi not as his right honourable friend,
minister without portfolio.
but as the minister without portfolio. Now, most people in the general public haven't a clue what a minister without portfolio is. They just about get that a minister with portfolio, well, you do portfolio of education or portfolio of health or whatever. But the fact that he did that and said, I'm following due process, he was cauterising himself from the problem. That means Zahawi has been cut adrift and he will go.
Really? Right. Do you share that assessment?
Well, I think that the one thing the Prime Minister has now put himself in the position of, if it is found that he has to go, the Prime Minister has no choice but to do sacking. He can't accept a resignation. He's now put himself in a position where he has to sack.
He's got to be seen to be in charge.
Yeah, otherwise that will reflect badly on the Prime Minister.
Right.
So I think this is quite a high-stakes couple of weeks coming up as to how this pans out.
And just to touch on one thing before we speak to Olivia, who's down at Westminster for us, perhaps an indication of the attack line to come from Keir Starmer, talking about a speculative question why the Prime Minister may not want to talk about tax avoidance and family connections and so on. And then, of course, we had Stephen Flynn coming in from the SNP with quite a clever question, asking the Prime Minister to give some personal financial advice.
Yes, it was very clever because he linked it, obviously, with the chairman of the BBC and Boris Johnson. He linked it then, ultimately, a bit of a low blow, but he linked it against the Prime Minister's wife's non-dom status, as was. So clearly trying to get a personal attack on the Prime Minister from the global malaise over tax affairs that the government's experiencing.
And you spotted a literary allusion with Burns Night.
The literary allusion that he used was, of course, does he think the people of Scotland will look at Westminster and think, what a parcel of rogues in a nation, which, of course, comes from the great Burns poem about how the Act of Union came together. But the point is this, that the leader of the SNP missed. When Burns was talking about a parcel of rogues in a nation, he was talking about Scottish politicians, not English.
Yeah, well, might come back to bite. Last thought before we go to Olivia, in terms of what happens from now on. I mean, I assume that Sunak will be preparing his own defences on tax issues, bearing in mind that Labour will try and gun on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's never been any allegation about the Prime Minister's tax affairs. It was always about the wife, and I was always very uncomfortable about that. I mean, the idea of, servitude,
family member.
Servitude because your husband's taken a job and you have to change. I thought we were way past that. It's always sat with me uncomfortably about the attacks that were on his wife. And as I understand it, there's never been an allegation made to the Prime Minister about his own tax affairs.
Yeah,
Mark,
of course we should. Yes,
I just very briefly, I just think it would make it a lot simpler if all members of Parliament had to be transparent with their tax returns.
As they are.
I think that's fundamentally. I think that's fundamentally unfair. And I'll tell you what. Because I think it's fundamentally unfair because it gets looked at in a different prism. You will drive people out of Parliament, and just look at what Sky News were doing with the Westminster files. They have conflated things to say, Barry, that all the donations you have gone in your own pocket, as they have with me. It's an irresponsible way forward, and you will drive a lot of people out of politics.
We are robust enough to fight back and say, no, that's not the case, and we can explain it. And we should be able to do that with our tax affairs as well.
We'll explore this in more detail fairly shortly, but let's actually go to Westminster now, because our political reporter, Olivia Utley, is there for us. Olivia, we were just discussing, we got to the Zahawi story eventually, but quite an interesting approach from the Labour leader to go in on this failure of the probation service.
Absolutely. It felt like quite a wise approach from Keir Starmer. At times it felt like he was the sort of head teacher telling off the naughty schoolboy. Objectively, of course, the chaos in the probation services in the case of Zara Alina are far more important than Nadeem Zahawi's tax affairs. And by homing in on that, rather than the sort of squalid, you might call it, chaos in Westminster, Starmer sort of positioned himself as the Prime Minister in waiting, the statesman-like one, and put Rishi Sunak immediately on the back foot. But when we did get to the Zahawi issue, it's clear, I agree with Barry Gardiner, it felt very much as though the Prime Minister had cauterised himself, I think was the expression Barry used, from the Zahawi case, and it very much felt like Zahawi has now been cut adrift. Last week, Sunak was standing up, essentially defending Zahawi's tax affairs entirely. Now his line is pretty much nothing to do with me, Gov. It does raise some quite interesting questions for Simon Case in the Cabinet Office, because Rishi Sunak has now said multiple times that he was advised that the matter was resolved and that it was okay to appoint Nadeem Zahawi. So it feels definitely as though the blame game has now started in Whitehall.
Yeah, and interesting that Stephen Flynn for the SNP going on this tax issue as well, asking for that personal financial advice from the Prime Minister, an indication, as we've just been discussing, that maybe that is the next target for the opposition on the whole tax issue.
Definitely, and I think that we've sort of almost been allowed to forget the non-dom problems that Sunak faced last spring, but they're coming back to bite him now. And I think what Labour and Stephen Flynn there from the SNP was reminding the Conservatives of is that there's no escaping this. Rishi Sunak is a very, very rich man. Every time tax affairs come up, it's going to be really awkward for him to come out and defend his family.
Yeah. Olivia, for the moment, thank you for that. Back to you for more analysis. Of course, we did get a question, just to remind you, at PMQs about the Trans-Pennine rail route, close to someone else's heart. But, of course, let's reflect the Convention of the North is actually taking place in Manchester today. Many managed to get there by trade eventually at this very moment. Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove has spoken a little earlier, while Shadow Levelling Up Secretary Lisa Nandy will later this afternoon talk about Labour's position. Our reporter Sophie Reaper has been getting the views of those people in the region.
The phrase levelling up has always been controversial. Originally part of the Conservative Party's 2019 manifesto, the idea is to close the gap between the southeast and less prosperous areas of the UK.
It's simply wrong that individuals in communities in the North and the Midlands have limited life chances and fewer opportunities than those in London and the southeast.
One part of levelling up is, of course, improving regional infrastructure. For that, the construction industry requires support, but are they getting what they need?
I would like to see more people come into the industry with a higher level of skill and training. I'd like to see more women in the industry. I'd like to have our industry reflect the wider society. So not quite yet. It's early days, and to actually change the amount of people that come into our industry will take a significant amount of time.
Last year, the government set out 12 levelling up missions to achieve by 2030. Just one of those was to significantly increase the number of people with high-quality skills training in each region. I asked Sean what he made of the government's progress.
I actually think the distribution of what the government spends in the construction industry needs to be more even. So we need to improve our infrastructure. That would include hospitals, roads, homes, education. We need more money invested in those areas.
Last week, the North received £583.1 million in order to level up. But with both the North East and Yorkshire and Humber receiving less money than London, questions have been asked about just how fairly that money has been divided.
Right, so...
When asked, this is what the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, had to say.
What we're doing is investing in local communities across the country. Levelling up is about making sure people feel pride in the places they call home. It's about driving jobs and investment. That's what we're doing.
Huge investments have been made across the north of England, including £50 million for a new Northern Eden project in Morecambe and £20 million for a quayside regeneration in Gateshead. But do the people of the north feel they will actually benefit as a result? Do you think you've benefited from levelling up?
No. Yeah, they may have put some in Morecambe, 50 million, but that's to build a brand new thing that isn't there at the minute.
Well, the government need to start caring, not just the government, local authorities as well. Because we run a food bank here, we're basically giving free food away, and we've got a lot of families struggling, and people actually willing to considering to take their own lives because they're struggling. That's not levelling up to me.
It just depends. If they put it in education and they put it in NHS, yeah, I would have benefited.
but I don't think I benefited.
It's clear that money is definitely being invested here in the north of England, but only time will tell whether it will actually lead to levelling up. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
So is it grim up north? It's not perhaps just a joke, as we've seen from the latest statistics on productivity and wages, of course. Well, Barry Gardner, Alex Shelbrooke still with us here in the studio. And Alex, of course, you're from a West Yorkshire constituency, and you were talking about, before PMQs, this TransPennine, the rail line. There was an interesting question there pointing out that, you know, this is still a bit of a shambles, a contract expiring in May, and this is one of the key issues to try and get levelling up, actually working on the ground.
That's right. I mean, I was talking about the whole TransPennine rail system. Obviously, TransPennine Express are one of the companies that run it, and it's a very poor service. And I think my colleague Jason there is absolutely right. If there isn't a turnaround of this, the government needs to step in and say, sorry, you're not. Well, I mean, I'm almost loosely using the word running this service anymore, and that's obviously happened with lots of franchises. But ultimately, what these rail companies have got to understand is you are in a precarious position now that if you make this service so unreliable, you will collapse the system because people have other options now than to go into the office.
Yeah, for working from home, yeah, of course. And just looking at the whole question of north-south divide, so we've got Lisa Nandy, who's going to be speaking after Michael Gove, but Andy Burnham, Mayor of Manchester, Labour Mayor of Manchester, Greater Manchester, talking about hard-wiring levelling up into UK law and giving local administrations the sort of Westminster-type powers.
Well, look, this was something that we actually tried to do back at the very beginning of the Blair government in 97-98. And you'll remember John Prescott, the old Department of Environment, Transport in the regions, talking about getting much stronger powers for the regions. It didn't happen. They didn't want it. But I think the times have changed. I think we were ahead of the game then, and the public just said, no, we don't think that more politicians is the answer to any question we've got.
But does it
I actually think that localism now, localism where people are saying, yeah, we can, if we have the money, and that's the key thing, you can't just give the power and the responsibility, you've got to give the resources. But if we've got the money locally, then we can do it better.
Let's talk about resources. Is it, yet again, a question about money? This IPPR report, looking at the OECD average, that with 397 billion less than should have been invested.
Yes.
Where's the money going to come from?
Well, the money is going to have to come, ultimately, from improving our growth, yes, but that is going to come from what we talked about at the beginning, and it's improving our productivity, and that means improving our skills and our investment.
Gentlemen, thank you both for being with us for an interesting Prime Minister's Questions session. More analysis to come, and of course we'll be reflecting on that convention in the North and what they're saying there in Manchester. Stay with us, back after this break.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office. A lot of low cloud, drizzle and fog will affect southern parts of the UK, whilst a band of rain moves across central areas. Brighter skies follow in the north. We've seen the rain earlier, and showers push into northern Scotland with some heavy downpours, hail, thunder and snow over the mountains. But otherwise some bright spells in between those showers and sunshine reappearing for Northern Ireland, southern Scotland and northern England during the afternoon. Got this band of rain in central parts, and then to the south of that it stays cold, it stays gloomy, a lot of low cloud and fog about. Temperatures at 6 to 8 Celsius, although it's 7 or 8 Celsius in the north as well. Now this cold front will push south and it will clear that low cloud, mist and fog during the rest of Wednesday, but it will bring a spell of rain for a time, that rain affecting the Midlands into South Wales and then southern parts of England during the evening, clearing away by midnight, and then we've got those clear skies returning. And this cold front will also help to clear the very cold air that we've had stuck at the surface during recent mornings. So although there will be a touch of frost in places on Thursday morning, it won't be nearly as cold as we've seen across southern areas. Meanwhile, it will be colder in the north because we've lost the southwesterly winds, and so a touch of frost for Scotland, for Northern Ireland, but bright skies for many into Thursday. The best of the sunshine will be in the west, a bit more cloud coming into the east, along with 1 or 2 showers, but for the vast majority, actually, it is looking dry, it's looking bright, and temperatures won't stray far from average, 6 to 8 Celsius by and large up and down the country. So we've lost the very mild air that we've had in the north, and we've also lost the very cold air that's been stuck at the surface in the south. Temperatures mostly returning to average over the next couple of days. Then we've got further showers coming into the North Sea on Thursday evening. Clear spells out to the west, another touch of frost to begin things mainly in the north, and then frosty in the south on Saturday morning. That's where the best of the sunshine will be, though.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go. But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 1 o'clock. A very good afternoon. You're with GB News Live and me, Mark Longhurst, coming up for you this lunchtime. Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer locking horns once more at Prime Minister's questions. This time, yes, it's Nadhim Zahawi's tax affairs. Now, MPs here in the studio say that it appears that the Prime Minister may already have actually cast the Tory party chairman adrift. We'll have more analysis coming up throughout this hour. A surge of small boats crossing the English Channel today as people smuggling gangs take advantage of a break in the weather. We'll have the latest from Mark White, who's monitoring the position for us down in Dover. And as Met Police Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley warns, painful stories will emerge as the force roots out hundreds of corrupt officers. Will the public start to lose faith in our police? Plus, 2 British voluntary aid workers killed in Ukraine. We'll speak to a journalist who spoke to them shortly before they went missing. And don't forget, get in touch with what your views are of PMQs and the rest of the issues of the day. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Let's get the latest news headlines now with Aaron.
Hello there, it is 1:01. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has resisted calls to sack the Conservative Party chairman at a heated PMQs this afternoon, but he stopped short of giving him unequivocal support. Rishi Sunak says due process should be followed and an investigation into Nadhim Zahawi's tax affairs should be allowed to reach its conclusion. It's after it's been revealed Mr Zahawi paid a tax penalty while serving as Chancellor. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has accused Mr Sunak of being hopelessly weak and unsuitable for the job. But the Prime Minister told the Commons no issues were raised when he appointed Mr Zahawi.
Can't have it both ways. The shadow leader, also his party chair, both urged me and the government to appoint an independent advisor. And now he objects to that independent advisor doing their job. It's simple political opportunism and everyone can see through it.
His failure to sack him when the whole country can see what's going on shows how hopelessly weak he is. A Prime Minister overseeing chaos, overwhelmed at every turn. He can't say when ambulances will get to heart attack victims again. He can't say when the prison system will keep streets safe again. He can't even deal with tax avoiders in his own cabinet. Is he starting to wonder if this job is just too big for him?
The German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, has confirmed his country will supply tanks to Ukraine and will authorise their re-export from other countries. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has welcomed the decision, saying it will strengthen Ukraine's defensive firepower. Germany has finally agreed to provide 14 Leopard 2 tanks and has lifted its veto on allies sending their German-made vehicles too. The United States are expected to pledge at least 30 of its Abrams tanks later, providing a boost to Ukraine's ability to counter a Russian spring offensive. The Kremlin, though, has described it as a blatant provocation and says Western tanks in Ukraine will burn like all the rest. The Met Police Commissioner says painful stories will emerge as work progresses to rid the force of hundreds of corrupt officers. Sir Mark Rowley has apologised to the victims of former Officer David Carrick, who pleaded guilty to 49 criminal charges, including 24 counts of rape. He says Carrick should not have been a police officer, and also says the force has failed to apply the same ruthlessness to guarding their own integrity as they have to confronting criminals.
I think we failed as investigators, where we should have been more intrusive and joined the dots over his repeated misogyny over decades. And as leaders, our mindset should have been more determined to spot and root out such a misogynist. So as I say, I apologise to his victims, and I want to say sorry to all the women across London who feel let down by this and whose trust in policing is shaken by this.
Meanwhile, the government's plan to replace the Human Rights Act has been criticised by MPs and peers. A cross-party committee says the proposed Bill of Rights will make it harder for people to enforce their rights and will restrict certain protections the government finds inconvenient. But ministers say it will strengthen freedom of speech and curb abuses of the current system. A 14-year-old boy has been arrested after a teenage girl was stabbed at a school in Manchester. Officers arrived at Parswood High School yesterday afternoon. The girl was taken to hospital for serious but not life-threatening injuries. Police are appealing for information. Amazon workers are striking for the first time in the UK in a dispute over pay and conditions. Around 300 staff at the Amazon's Coventry warehouse have walked out in protest against a pay rise of 50 pence an hour. The unions described that as derisory because of the severe conditions workers face. Amazon says a tiny proportion of the workforce are involved and they're proud to offer competitive pay. However, a GMB union member says Amazon workers have had enough.
The pressure cooker environment that they work in anyway, with the targets that they're expected to reach, they just wear them out, get rid of them, replace them. After all that, they just offered a 50 pence pay increase in the biggest cost of living crisis that we've had in decades. And I think when workers have got nothing to lose, you see them coming out fighting.
Scottish teachers are halfway through their 16-day strike action. Staff in both South Ayrshire and Edinburgh have been walking out. The unions claim the Scottish Government have little or no interest in resolving the dispute. The government says the pay demands are not affordable. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens, but now it's back to Mark Longhurst.
Aaron, thanks very much indeed. So, Rishi Sunak pressed on Nadeem Zahawi's tax affairs by the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer and indeed the leader of the SNP, too, Stephen Flynn, at Prime Minister's questions. Spirited exchanges which appear to rattle the Prime Minister at times. Let's go live to Westminster now and our political reporter Olivia Utley, who's been following today's session. Olivia, as we're discussing an interesting approach from Keir Starmer, who went in a sort of a bleak issue on the failure of the probation service, then going on to the tax issue, but in conclusion asking the Prime Minister if it was not too much of he's not big enough for the job, effectively.
Yes, it was a very interesting approach from Keir Starmer. He did his forensic, lawyer-like questioning of the Prime Minister on the mess that the probation services are in, which gave him the upper hand in the conversation and put Rishi Sunak on the back foot. Then when he did get onto the tax affairs, he brought up Rishi Sunak's own tax situation, which was a big reminder, I think, for both the Conservatives and for the public of the mess that the Prime Minister got into last year with his wife's non-dom tax status. A reminder that Labour has not forgotten this issue is not going away before the election. When Rishi Sunak did get onto the Nadeem Zahawi case, I was actually surprised at how strong he sounded. Essentially, his line, and he has clearly rehearsed this line, is that he was told by the Cabinet Office that it was OK to appoint Nadeem Zahawi and that the issues had been resolved. So if there was anything he didn't find out, it wasn't really his fault. That line might sort of hold for now. He also did quite a good job, I thought, of trying to turn what's been seen as his lack of political nous and lack of political experience into a strength. There are some backbenchers who are mumbling that, you know, a more experienced Prime Minister might understand that whatever the technicalities of the situation, politically he had to cut Nadeem Zahawi loose. But Rishi Sunak said, no, I'm a man that follows due process. I won't just do what's politically expedient. So it wasn't a terrible performance for Rishi Sunak, but he was certainly on the back foot. And Keir Starmer's brief forensic questioning worked well.
Yeah, but as you say, interesting that he, very different tone to his answer about Nadeem Zahawi last week. No issues were raised with me. Now, our MPs here in the studio say it may indicate that the decision has already been taken, as was said by Barry Gardiner, to cauterise the Tory party chairman, and an indication that he wasn't even speaking to him or referring to him as my right honourable friend. It was the minister without portfolio.
Yes, definitely. I thought that was very interesting too. It certainly seems as though Rishi Sunak has decided to cut Nadeem Zahawi adrift. Last week he stood up and entirely defended him. Now his line is essentially, it's not my problem. I wasn't told the full extent of what was going on. Rishi Sunak seems to be shifting blame from himself back onto Nadeem Zahawi and onto the Cabinet Office as well, who apparently didn't give him the full briefing. Of course, Labour will say, well, you knew that there were issues. If you weren't told the extent of them, why didn't you probe a little bit further? But for now, Rishi Sunak has cut himself off from Zahawi, and ministers are now saying that, you know, if the report comes through and it's shown that Nadeem Zahawi did behave in less than ministerial way, then Rishi Sunak will of course get rid of him. But for now, he's following due process is the line which he'll stick to.
Do you think then Number 10 will also be preparing perhaps to mount a defence over the Prime Minister's own tax situation? Because we had this quite interesting question from Stephen Flynn, the SNP leader, asking the Prime Minister for some personal financial advice.
Yes, certainly. I think that Number 10 is very twitchy about the idea that Rishi Sunak and his wife's own tax affairs are now going to be very much under the spotlight in the lead up to the next election. We always knew that, in a way, one of Rishi Sunak's biggest weaknesses is that he is a very rich man, and during a cost of living crisis, talking about even having the issue raised of having millions of tax paid or unpaid makes the Conservative Party seem pretty alien to the rest of the population. So Labour will certainly be using that as an attack in the next few months. And Number 10 has to find a better line than it did today, really, which was just to throw the Jeremy Corbyn grenade back at Keir Starmer, a grenade which is landing less and less powerfully each time.
Yeah, he's sort of tried to use that on quite a few occasions, but obviously the novelty is wearing off, perhaps.
Yes, it was interesting, though, I thought, the way that he compared himself resigning from Boris Johnson's government to Keir Starmer standing behind Jeremy Corbyn. That essentially is Rishi Sunak equating the tenures of Boris Johnson and Jeremy Corbyn, which I imagine won't go down particularly well with Johnsonites. And let's remember that Nadeem Zahawi is a key Johnsonite, and Rishi Sunak, we know that Boris Johnson is on manoeuvres. He's been in Kyiv, which is always a sign. Rishi Sunak is very worried about Boris Johnson's supporters sort of coalescing behind him. He needs to keep them on side. And in comparing Boris Johnson to Jeremy Corbyn, that might not have been the wisest strategic move.
Yeah. Now, we've got this Convention of the North taking place in Manchester today, which we'll refer to in a moment. But there was quite an interesting question, wasn't there, in that PMQs about the issue of the Trans-Pennine Railway, this east-west route, which is in such trouble. And the reflection, you know, that the contract is actually up in May, and questions as to what happens to that. It's one of the key elements, of course, of trying to get levelling up to work.
Yes, and I think that is a big problem for Rishi Sunak, that when he gets asked these specific questions about issues that are taking place in other parts of the country, it feels as though he's on the back foot, because what he's having to do is firefight all the time for issues which are taking place on his own front bench.
Yeah, which puts him on the back foot, of course. Well, Olivia, thank you very much indeed for the moment. Of course, more analysis to come throughout the afternoon. But as we were just reflecting, the convention is taking place in Manchester today. And at this moment, Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove has been speaking, and the Shadow Levelling Up Secretary Lisa Nandy later this afternoon, about what levelling up actually means, of course, for the north of England. Well, our reporter Sophie Reaper has been getting the views of those people there. And this is what she's found.
The phrase levelling up has always been controversial. Originally part of the Conservative Party's 2019 manifesto, the idea is to close the gap between the South East and less prosperous areas of the UK.
It's simply wrong that individuals in communities in the North and the Midlands have limited life chances and fewer opportunities than those in London and the South East.
One part of levelling up is, of course, improving regional infrastructure. For that, the construction industry requires support, but are they getting what they need?
I would like to see more people come into the industry with a higher level of skill and training. I'd like to see more women in the industry. I'd like to have our industry reflect the wider society. So not quite yet. It's early days, and to actually change the amount of people that come into our industry will take a significant amount of time.
Last year, the government set out 12 levelling up missions to achieve by 2030. Just one of those was to significantly increase the number of people with high-quality skills training in each region. I asked Sean what he made of the government's progress.
I actually think the distribution of what the government spends in the construction industry needs to be more even. So we need to improve our infrastructure. That would include hospitals, roads, homes, education. We need more money invested in those areas.
Last week, the North received £583.1 million in order to level up. But with both the North East and Yorkshire and Humber receiving less money than London, questions have been asked about just how fairly that money has been divided.
Right, so
when asked, this is what the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, had to say.
what we're doing is investing in local communities across the country. Levelling Up is about making sure people feel pride in the places they call home. It's about driving jobs and investment. That's what we're doing.
Huge investments have been made across the north of England, including £50 million for a new Northern Eden project in Morecambe and £20 million for a quayside regeneration in Gateshead. But do the people of the north feel they will actually benefit as a result? Do you think you've benefited from levelling up?
No. Yeah, they may have put some in Morecambe, 50 million, but that's to build a brand new thing that isn't there at the minute.
Well, the government need to start caring, not just the government, local authorities as well. Because we run a food bank here. We're basically giving free food away, and we've got a lot of families struggling, and people actually willing to considering to take their own lives because they're struggling. That's not levelling up to me.
It just depends. If they put it in education and they put it in NHS, yeah, I would have benefited. But I don't think I benefited.
It's clear that money is definitely being invested here in the north of England, but only time will tell whether it will actually lead to levelling up. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
So Sophie getting us the picture there on the wider situation in the north. What about the convention itself in Manchester, which is going on? Well, let's bring you now the remarks that the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, has made a little earlier.
The British government has previously laid foundations for a successful levelling up policy. OK, it wasn't in this country, But we did it in a different country, which is great, isn't it? We can... Post-war Germany, we had a hand in creating the structure. So let's take that, but let's say, well, come on then. Let's look at what happened, and let's do the same here, and take levelling up from a powerful idea into an even better reality. We need to go further down this devolution road. But everybody's on this journey. The North is on this journey. I have the real sense at this 4th Convention of the North that we're not going back to the way things were. We are getting more organised as a collection of geographies. We are working across political lines. We are increasingly speaking with one voice back to Whitehall and Westminster. Things can't be as they've always been, where we have been at times treated as second class. We're saying we're requiring actually change in a polite way, but in a pretty firm way.
Andy Burnham, who was speaking in Manchester a little earlier, on the way ahead. Our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, is in Manchester. And, Darren, of course, we reflect it's not been the most convenient fact for the government that we had this IPPR report issued before the convention started, that the lowest levels of investment, 35th out of 38 OECD countries, Slovakia, Poland and Hungary all enjoying more investment. Average pay in the north, £1.60 an hour lower than the rest of England. Productivity, £7 lower per hour than the rest of England.
Yeah, indeed. I think it's actually more the productivity that is the concern. I mean, you're right in pointing out wages are lower here, but then thus is the cost of living. But yes, productivity is just one of the major challenges facing, it must be said, not just the north of England, but different parts of England. It's a similar story actually if you go to the east coast or indeed to the southwest. But yes, we're in Manchester today. There are more than 1,000 delegates here in this convention centre representing businesses, but also the politics of many of the newly elected Metro mayors that we have across the country, from Yorkshire down to the West Midlands to Greater Manchester and Merseyside here. And interestingly, Michael Gove has actually drawn on the fact about how unequal the UK is. It's got a primal city, London, a bit like France does, or indeed Russia. It's one of the reasons that we're one of the few places in Europe that's got a megacity. We're not like Germany that has got proper distribution with 4 big cities, with Hamburg, Frankfurt, Munich and Berlin. And that means that there is more inequality. He said it effectively, it was like having a football team with a star striker, but a midfield that cannot get the ball upfield and a defence that's full of holes. And that's his point, is that London just sucks in all the attention, all the investments, and often leaves other parts of the country behind. Now, what is his solution? He argues it's actually more devolution. Is people like Andy Burnham and others saying what they need is more power, that there should be more of these regional mayors, and we're expecting that to happen in the years to come. I think the message coming from here in Manchester, Mark, is effectively they want more money. They don't want what happened last week, which is that Whitehall's got billions of pounds in this levelling up fund that they dole out through a bidding process. The argument for Andy Burnham, and indeed from Andy Street, who's the Conservative Mayor of the West Midlands, their argument is they want the money up front and they want to make the decisions. They say that they're best placed to make the decisions affecting their communities because they know those communities a hell of a lot better, they would argue, than the mandarins in Whitehall.
Now, they've heard from Michael Gove. Lisa Nandy's Shadow Levelling Up will be speaking. And alongside Andy Burnham, where he's been speaking about hard-wiring levelling up into the system and obviously giving local authorities the same sort of powers as Westminster. But as you were saying, it still needs the cash. Are we likely to hear from Lisa Nandy what Labour's spending plans would be?
Well, I think in large regards, interestingly, on this, both Labour and the Conservatives, at least in principle, seem to be on the same page. That is, that further devolution is massively part of the solution. I think you're right in saying that it's all very well and good devolving powers, but powers are pretty meaningless if they've not got some financial clout behind them. And frankly, when you look at the public finances at the moment, we saw those figures released yesterday, you know, the UK having to dole out billions and billions and billions of pounds in December last year just on interest rates on our debt alone, the highest we'd ever seen since records began. There's not an awful lot of money, to be found particularly down the back seat of the sofa at the moment. So Labour, if they become the government in a couple of years' time, which, looking at the opinion polls, would you think is more likely than not at the moment, they're also going to struggle with finding money to, in many ways, redistribute to these parts of England, and it must be said Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland as well. I think that is the big political challenge for whoever is in government. That it is all very well and good listening to Michael Gove talking about like local and accountable leadership and talking about how other regions need to benefit the most outside of London. And that actually the government now apparently want to change the phrase, by the way, from levelling up to gauging up.
Right.
But in the end, actually, it's all going to boil down to money, isn't it? And as I say, at the moment, for whoever is in power, there's not an awful lot of that around.
Yeah, so spending up maybe could be the phrase. Who knows? Darren, for the moment in Manchester, thank you very much indeed for updating us there. Coming up here on GB News, another surge in those small boat crossings today. The smugglers taking advantage of the calmer weather conditions. We'll have the latest with our man Mark White down in Dover to update us on the picture. But let's take a short break now.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride. Oh, she's on it today! Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, a huge surge in those small boat crossings has been underway in the Channel this morning. It comes as the people smuggling gangs appear to be taking advantage of a break in weather conditions. Well, GB News sources can confirm at least 170 people have been taken in at Dover after they were intercepted in 4 small boats in the Channel overnight and this morning. Our sources telling us that more than 1,000 could be trying to cross tomorrow to take advantage of the weather conditions. Let's get the very latest now at Dover with our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, who's been monitoring the position. And Mark, I guess it's part of this equation where we're told that the wind supplies for energy are not great because there is no wind out there. And I guess that means that the sea is flat calm.
Well, for once, yeah, we've really had a couple of months in which the weather conditions out in the Channel
most of the time have been impassable for these tiny inflatable boats, and they need really flat calm conditions. There's only been a few days like that, and that means until today there was only less than 600 people who have crossed the English Channel since the new year. It was higher than that at this time last year. Today, a break in the weather conditions again, but it's only a short break, and it's changing all the time. So no break in the weather conditions tomorrow. The weather will close in again this evening. So those that want to make it across have only a few hours left for these criminal gangs to try to push them out, and they've been doing that. We've got an update on some of the figures you were mentioning there. You said 170 had made it to Kent. We can now update that, Mark, to say that 350, we understand, have made it in 7 small boats, been intercepted by Border Force in UK waters and taken here to the processing centre at Dover Harbour. In addition, there are other vessels as we speak that have been spotted and are under French escort out there in the Channel. Now, that doesn't mean that they'll make it as far as UK waters. Quite often what happens with a significant proportion of these small boats is they just don't have the steam to get right over. They run out of fuel, the currents, the tides are just too much for them, and then they end up turning back towards Calais and Dunkirk. We know of at least 1 or 2 boats that may be turning back as we speak. There was also a couple of incidents on a beach near Calais this morning where the French police were able to intervene before these small boats got into the water, punctured the small boats, and the migrants ran back into the dunes there, of course. Safe, of course, to go and try another day once they get another small boat to be able to do that. Sources had said to us at the beginning of today that possibly as many as 1,000 might attempt the crossing today. It all depends really on whether they can get and evade the law enforcement agencies on the other side, and of course whether they can get past that sort of midway point into UK waters, which, as I said, Mark, doesn't always happen because of the conditions out there.
So clearly the numbers there are still waiting and, as you say, emerging from the dunes. But our information is that the French authorities are taking some action on that other side of the Channel.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair to the French, they do try, you know, perhaps not as hard as many people here would like them to be trying, but it is a very significant stretch of both beach and dunes that they have to try to patrol. If I tell you that just on Saturday, for instance, when we had another surge in migrants crossing, they were crossing from a stretch of coastline from Dunkirk right south of Boulogne to a place called Brec, which is an 80-mile stretch of coastline. Now, you need thousands of officers to properly man that coast and those dunes effectively. So it's a bit hit or miss. They try, you know, to do best intelligence work of where they think the boats might go off, but they certainly weren't expecting them to launch that far south, Mark.
Mark, as ever, thanks for updating us with the position there in Dover. Back to you, of course, as more details emerge on those numbers. Thanks very much indeed. More on that, of course, throughout the afternoon. We'll also be bringing the latest on these 2 Britons who've been killed in Ukraine, trying to help those in need, speaking to one of their friends about the circumstances. First, let's get an update on the latest news headlines with Aaron.
It's just after 1:30. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has resisted calls to sack the Conservative Party chairman at a heated PMQs this afternoon. Rishi Sunak says due process should be followed and an investigation into Nadeem Zahawi's tax affairs should be allowed to reach its conclusion. It's after it was revealed Mr Zahawi paid a tax penalty when serving as Chancellor. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has accused Mr Sunak of being hopelessly weak and unsuitable for the job. But the Prime Minister told the Commons no issues were raised when he appointed Mr Zahawi, and he's accused Sir Keir of playing petty politics.
Shadow leader, also his party chair, both urged me and the government to appoint an independent advisor. And now he objects to that independent advisor doing their job.
He can't even deal with tax avoiders in his own cabinet. Yeah. Is he starting to wonder if this job is just too big for him?
Germany's confirmed it will supply tanks to Ukraine and will authorise their re-export from other countries. Germany's agreed to provide 14 Leopard 2 tanks and has lifted its veto on allies sending their German-made vehicles too. The United States are expected to pledge at least 30 Abrams tanks later today. The Kremlin has described it as a blatant provocation and says Western tanks in Ukraine will burn like all the rest. The Met Police Commissioner says 2 or 3 officers are facing criminal court appearances every week, and the public should prepare for painful stories to emerge as the force attempts to root out hundreds of corrupt officers. Sir Mark Rowley apologised to the victims of former officer David Carrick, who pleaded guilty to 49 criminal charges, including 24 counts of rape. He says Carrick should not have been a police officer. And a 14-year-old boy has been arrested after a teenage girl was stabbed at a school in Manchester. Officers arrived at Parswood High School yesterday afternoon. The girl was taken to hospital for treatment for serious but not threatening injuries. TV online and DAB Plus Radio, this is GB News. Do stay with us.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Just update you very quickly before we head to the funeral for Elle Edwards up in Merseyside. We're just getting a bit more from Downing Street after this exchange, of course, at PMQs about Nadeem Zahawi's tax issue. The Prime Minister's spokesman has just been speaking to reporters. Downing Street unable to say that Rishi Sunak was confident no more damaging surprises would emerge about Nadeem Zahawi's tax affairs. The Prime Minister's press secretary saying, I don't think any of us can predict what may come up, although the right process is in place. Going on after being pressed over what had been said about Mr Zahawi with him addressing the matter in full previously. The press secretary saying, I won't get into private conversations. The Prime Minister was given assurances it had been dealt with prior to what was said in the House on Wednesday, that's last week. Pressed further, she would not say whether those assurances were different to the ones received at the time that Mr Zahawi was appointed as a minister. So clearly some questions still outlying there, according to this latest statement from the Downing Street press secretary. But we'll update you on that as we get more from our political staff. Well, as we say, the funeral of Elle Edwards, who was shot dead outside the pub in Wallasey, took place today. Connor Chapman, who's 22, has been charged with her murder. Well, the mourners were paying respects. Reverend Jeff Staples saying that she had laughed and joked and had been, of course, a light in everyone's lives. Joining us now, news reporter Theo Chikombo, who's been at St Nicholas's Church in Wallasey. And Theo, of course, an incredibly difficult time for her family, but a time for the local community too to reflect on what's been going on there.
That's right, yes, there are probably hundreds of people here. That's including those who were able to get inside the church, family and friends, but also those from the local community who were out here in support as well, and just to be there for the family as well. They have only just left a few minutes ago, and it's been very quiet here as they've been remembering the life of Elle Edwards. We do know in December she was out with friends on Christmas Eve, and a gunman shot towards her when she was in the pub, and of course it's meant her family didn't have a Christmas that they anticipated. She would, of course, have been spending time with her family on Christmas Day. Now, in paying tribute, her father, Tim, he's saying his daughter was the most beautiful and bright star, and that the glue that held his big family together. And he also added that everyone that met Elle knew how special she was and will love her and miss her forever. And her killing marked the 5th fatal shooting in Merseyside since August last year. Now, a 22-year-old man, as you've mentioned, Connor Chapman, has been charged with murdering Elle Edwards and is due to go on trial on 7th of June, which is due to last around 3 to 4 weeks. And just to finish off, her father, Tim, has said a foundation has been set up in her name, and he hopes that it can do some good for the community here, and admits that the funeral today was going to be challenging, but it's something that had to be done for himself, the family, and of course close friends to the family as well.
Yes, and I think her father helping to carry the coffin, of course, awful time, but as you say, remembering her in the best way and her smiles and laughs, as the family said. But Theo, thank you very much for updating us there in Wallasey. Now, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, has told the London Assembly that rooting out corrupt police officers won't be rapid and will be painful. Well, that comes after former PC David Carrick pleaded guilty to 49 sexual offences and was sacked from the force last week. Well, let's go live to the London Assembly now. Reporter Ellie Costello can update us. And Sir Mark Rowley, of course, has been very open about these issues, Ellie, so far, but it appears that there could be more pain to come.
Yes, absolutely. Good afternoon to you, Mark. He did seem very open and transparent this morning, that must be said, but there does seem to be this avalanche of court cases involving Metropolitan Police officers at the moment, and quite a stunning admission, really, from Sir Mark Rowley, who is the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. He said that 2 to 3 officers are in court cases every single week at the moment. So just an indication of where we're at in terms of rooting out these rogue officers. A warning from Sir Mark Rowley that there is a lot more of these cases to come, and that started really this morning, the latest being the crimes of PC Hussein Chihab. He pled guilty yesterday to child sex offences. He is a serving Metropolitan Police officer who was actually posted in a school in Enfield in North London, and he pled guilty yesterday to 4 counts of sexual activity with a girl between the ages of 13 and 15, 3 counts of making indecent photographs with a child, and sexual communication with a child as well. Now, he will be sentenced in March. The Met say there's no evidence that Chihab's offending had any link to his role in the school in Enfield, but he had been vetted prior to his role in the school, but because those crimes hadn't yet been reported, of course it wasn't flagged up on the system. Well, the first question in this hearing here this morning at the London Assembly was, of course, about the Chihab case, and this is what Sir Mark Rowley had to say about it.
you will see progress from us step by step as we chase more trust, less crime and high standards, which I'm focusing on here. We must improve dramatically for London. But lifting the stone and revealing painful truths will not be resolved overnight. And I mustn't pretend it will do, and I hope you understand that that can't be done. We have to prepare for more painful stories as we confront the issues that we face. We've discussed before sort of the systemic failings that create these problems of these officers who corrupt our integrity. And as we put in more resource, more assertive tactics, as we're more open to people reporting incidents to us from within and from without the organisation, as we more determinedly take on these cases, it will tackle the problems that we face, but it won't be rapid, and it will be painful. And in that context, we need your support and the support of people of London. Please don't lose heart as we confront these issues, as we do this necessary and painful work to finally confront those and rid the organisation of those who corrupt our integrity.
Of course, Ellie, after the Carrick and Cousins cases in particular, the question for all chief constables of how to reassure public and retain their trust in police forces.
Absolutely, Mark, and that is no easy feat, is it? Especially for women and girls in London, Wayne Couzens and David Carrick actually being from the same part of the Metropolitan Police. For women across the capital city, it will be very, very difficult to regain this trust. It is an institution in crisis. And what Sir Mark Rowley was saying today was very open. He said that one of his priorities will be building up the trust of women and girls in the Met again, and he reiterated his apologies for failing the victims and also women and girls in the city as well. He did promise action though, and he's promised action from day one, bearing in mind he's only been the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police since September. He said he would be ruthless in rooting out anybody who questions the integrity of the Met, and he spoke as well about Operation Onyx. That's that operation or project, however you'd like to call it, going through historical cases of abuse and sexual abuse of women and girls, including a police officer. Now, he's going to look through all of those investigations and make sure that the right decision was made with them because, for example, in the David Carrick case, he was investigated and remained to be a serving Metropolitan Police officer. So Sir Mark Rowley admitted to that failing today, and he also said he'd be looking through all of these investigations, 1,071 of them, to make sure that the right decision was made. And he was clear that he would drain the swamp, but it will take time, and it is going to look worse before it looks any better.
Ellie, thank you very much indeed for that latest update there at the London Assembly. Thanks for all those details. Now, let's reflect. The National Lottery launched nearly 30 years ago. Would you believe? It could be you. If you remember that, the flagship slogan, giving millions hope that their numbers would come up in the right way. Well, yesterday, after £65 billion has been raised for good causes, the team who led that for the past 3 decades announcing they were stepping down. So, what has been learnt? How has the institution been built to what it is today? And what does the future hold for the National Lottery? Joining us now, Patrick O'Flynn, our political commentator, and an indication, of course, that a huge amount of good has been done. But was it really in the right way? Because a lot of people saying that it's those with the loudest voices that were able to get hold of the money.
Well, I think overall Camelot has to be judged as having done a very good job. I think they won 3 licence rounds in a row and they exceeded their financial targets by far. I think whenever you're giving out money to so-called good causes, controversies are going to arise. I think there was an early one about some grant going to guinea pig farmers in Peru, which was perhaps not a priority for the British public. And there have been more recent controversies too over certain sort of left-wing campaigning groups. But overall, I would say the money raised has gone to good causes. You know, every Olympics recently, we've had outstanding results for the UK team. And, that's something that I think many of us, I only play occasionally, but are very pleased to see. And, public funding would never have gone to, dinghy racers or whatever that brought home so many gold medals for us. So that's been great.
Yeah, sporting achievement, of course, has really been quite remarkable, as you say. I was going to ask you if you'd actually had a flutter yourself, because I think it's true of all of us. In the early days, we all got on board, but it sort of has tailed off. I mean, has it had its day?
No, I don't think it has, actually. I think you're quite right. The early few years, or the early few months particularly, nearly everyone seemed to have a go. I have the odd flutter, particularly when there's a rollover, but not a regular player. But I think it has an enormous and stable following among the British public, and the revenues streams are still coming in pretty fast. So I have to say, when people normally ask me what's John Major's legacy, I tend to say the Cones hotline, somewhat disparagingly. But I think we'll have to give him that the National Lottery was a better idea than that, was very well set up. As I say, right. Camelot have done a great job. And so that is a feather in his cap, and good for the country.
Yeah, we'll brush the privatised rail companies under the carpet for the moment. But let's reflect on a lot of suggestions saying, to move forward, maybe if they just made lots of £1 million prizes, it may actually re-engage people and reinvigorate the whole process.
Well, I think there are quite a lot of other lotteries that offer, smaller top prizes. But as far as I'm aware, the evidence is actually the opposite to that when there is this rollover week and, the top prize is not X million, but, X times 2 million, more people actually play. I don't know if that's because they get more publicity. So, I think a very big top prize, is for some people part of the magic of it and the sort of sitting, pondering what we would do if we were lucky enough to win. There are, aren't there some quite good second tier prizes that would set most of us up for life too. So I would kind of leave that to the experts, and hopefully the new company that's inherited the franchise, and I know they've incorporated the expertise of Camelot and taken that on board. Let's hope they make the right choices. But, so many things haven't worked in our country this century, really, that I think if there's something, if it's not broken, don't fix it about the National Lottery.
Let's celebrate something. Yeah, indeed. Patrick, thank you very much indeed for your time. Thanks for joining us once more. Now, let's reflect today. Scotland celebrating the 264th birthday of Rabbie Burns. For the majority, a day of perhaps of whisky, poetry, haggis, neeps and tatties. But over the last year, the 18th century poet has faced some criticism, of course, over the moral dilemmas that he faced during his lifetime. Our Scotland reporter, Tony Maguire, has this for us.
So, Burns Night is already upon us. But it's been a tough old year for the bard. Discussions have been ongoing on whether or not to reference his brush with the slave trade alongside his portrait hanging in Scotland's National Gallery. I met one of Scotland's leading Burns experts at Glasgow University to get to the bottom of this latest attempt to cancel Rabbie Burns.
If we rewind to May 1786, Burns's prospects aren't so good. And he tells us quite clearly, he is thinking of going to Jamaica to work on the slave trade. But he knew fine that bookkeepers like others would be pressed into service. Burns was thinking of going, but of course, crucially, doesn't go. To emphasise that and not to cite the 9 instances where he speaks out against slavery seems to me to be a wee bit asymmetrical.
Going all the way back to my school days, everything I can remember about Rabbie Burns tells me that he was a man for the people and he abhorred injustice. I asked Professor Carruthers just how fair is it that we're judging an 18th century poet by 21st century morality standards?
I don't want to downplay any injustice, and Robert Burns didn't want to downplay any injustice, and ultimately if we look at his writings in the round, he has a clear abolitionist voice. He is clearly against slavery. What do? Do we whitewash history? In other words, we cancel stuff. And the danger there is that we paper over the stuff that we might rightly want to object to.
Okay, so we've heard the academic perspective. What do the people think?
Do you think we should be judging someone that lived in the 18th century by 21st century standards?
Probably not, no. Because,
like contributes a lot to like primary school. Yeah, maybe like some of his poems, and like it was always a big deal, like doing it in front of your school.
I mean, I think he's done so much for not even just Scottish culture, but like global culture and literature that, I mean, especially if he didn't even take up the job, I wouldn't say that's enough to cancel him. Then if I'm not sure where I stand on whether people from the 18th century should be cancelled or not.
So there we have it. Both Professor Cruthers and members of the public give a big no to cancelling Robert Burns. This is Tony Maguire for GB News in Glasgow.
Well, in fact, we can get the latest with Tony now, because it's such a significant day that he is taking us to a very famous cottage behind you. They're Rabbie Burns' cottage, and I assume, Tony, that people will be making their pilgrimage there today.
Yes, well, it's certainly one of the places around Scotland. I'm in the town of Alloway, as you said, and this town is almost built on the back of Rabbie Burns. We've got the Poet's Path with lots of lovely little statues linking back to his poetry, and of course behind me the Robert Burns Birthplace Museum. Now, you know, the story that we're running with today and his links to the slave trade, a lot of people will probably be talking about that around their Burns supper tonight.
And you know, the controversy, of course, has to be addressed. But, I mean, for a lot of people, it is about a celebration. And I have to ask you, will you be indulging yourself in the great chieftain of the pudding race?
Of course, of course. You know, typically when I'm at home, I think it's quite a common thing now that people try and find their modern twists on the Burns supper. For me, it's haggis pakora. I know other people, they do like their haggis neeps and tatties straight up on the plate. But you're right, you're absolutely right. This is a day of celebration. You know, in 264 years.
I have to interrupt, because I know that all our listeners and viewers will be immediately saying, what is haggis pakora?
Oh, right, okay. Of all the things I thought you would ask me again about, I didn't think that would be it. So basically, we boil our haggis. Don't ever be tempted to put it in the microwave, although it can be done. But boil your haggis, make little balls. We rub it some gram flour, some cumin, some various herbs and spices, a little seasoning, and then we create a batter them up, and then plate them up. Even a wee sweet chilli dip is certainly something just to, you know, have a little modern taste. Ooh. There's nothing worse sometimes than sitting down to a plate mountain of food. So, you know, if you're fancying a little something different for Burns night.
A bit like a haggis nugget, then, in other words. And I have to ask you, a wee dram to wash that sweet chilli sauce down as well?
Oh yes, certainly. Everyone has their different tastes here. I'm not much for the peaty numbers from the islands, but you know, I'll definitely be digging out a little Speyside tonight and looking through. My favourite is Tam O'Shanter, of course, and right around the corner actually is the Brigadoon, where the witches chased poor Meg over the bridge and took off her tail. So the town of Alloway is just brimming with Burns culture. If you haven't been, it's certainly worth a visit.
Right. You're in the right place on the right day, and we wish you well with getting your pakoras in place for a little bit later. Thank you very much indeed for bringing us your recipe here this lunchtime. More, of course, from Tony, as everyone celebrates tonight's Burns night and the wee timorous beastie. Now, let's reflect that coming up here on GB News Live, we'll be updating you on all the issues of the day with the latest we're getting from Downing Street on Nadeem Zahawi's tax affairs. Indications, perhaps, that the Prime Minister is ready to, as MPs have said, cauterise the chairman of the Tory party. We'll be updating on that. Let's get an update now on the weather.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office. A lot of low cloud, drizzle and fog will affect southern parts of the UK, whilst a band of rain moves across central areas. Brighter skies follow in the north. We've seen the rain earlier, and showers push into northern Scotland with some heavy downpours, hail, thunder and snow over the mountains. But otherwise, some bright spells in between those showers and sunshine reappearing for Northern Ireland, southern Scotland and northern England during the afternoon. We've got this band of rain in central parts, and then to the south of that, it stays cold, it stays gloomy, a lot of low cloud and fog about. temperatures at 6 to 8 Celsius, although it's 7 or 8 Celsius in the north as well. Now, this cold front will push south and it will clear that low cloud, mist and fog during the rest of Wednesday, but it will bring a spell of rain for a time, that rain affecting the Midlands into South Wales and then southern parts of England during the evening, clearing away by midnight. And then we've got those clear skies returning. And this cold front will also help to clear the very cold air that we've had stuck at the surface during recent mornings. So although there will be a touch of frost in places on Thursday morning, it won't be nearly as cold as we've seen across southern areas. Meanwhile, it will be colder in the north because we've lost the southwesterly winds, and so a touch of frost for Scotland, for Northern Ireland, but bright skies for many into Thursday. The best of the sunshine will be in the west, a bit more cloud coming into the east, along with 1 or 2 showers, but for the vast majority, actually, it is looking dry, it's looking bright, and temperatures won't stray far from average, 6 to 8 Celsius by and large up and down the country. So we've lost the very mild air that we've had in the north, and we've also lost the very cold air that's been stuck at the surface in the south. Temperatures mostly returning to average over the next couple of days. Then we've got further showers coming into the North Sea on Thursday evening. Clear spells out to the west, another touch of frost to begin things mainly in the north, and then frosty in the south on Saturday morning. That's where the best of the sunshine will be, though.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes, back on the TV
Surprised
with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes.
Oh, good.
Already to bless.
Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous.
Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 2 o'clock. You're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this afternoon, a Prime Minister's questions, Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer clashing for the second week over Nadeem Zahawi's tax affairs. We'll bring you the latest analysis of what was a pretty tetchy exchange. A break in the weather leading to another surge in the small boats crossing the English Channel. We'll have the latest from Dover with Mark White monitoring the people smuggling gangs and how many are coming across the water. The Met Police Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, is warning painful stories will still emerge as the force roots out hundreds of corrupt officers. But will the public lose faith in our police? And it's Burns night. Revellers preparing to down a dram or two. And we discover that the amber liquid is, well, a tasty investment too. And get in touch with us on all those stories. Of course, email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk. Before that, let's update you on the latest headlines with Aaron.
Good afternoon, it's 2:minutes. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The Labour leader has accused the Prime Minister of being too weak to sack Nadhim Zahawi over his tax affairs at a heated Prime Minister's questions this afternoon. Sir Keir Starmer says any politician who seeks to avoid paying tax is not fit to be the Chancellor, and Rishi Sunak is unsuitable for the job. Well, the Prime Minister responded, saying due process is being followed and an investigation into Nadhim Zahawi's tax affairs should be allowed to reach its conclusion. He also accused Sir Keir of playing petty politics.
Opposition can't have it both ways. The shadow leader, his party chair, both urged me and the government to appoint an independent advisor. And now he objects to that independent advisor doing their job. It's simple political opportunism and everyone can see through it.
His failure to sack him, when the whole country can see what's going on, shows how hopelessly weak he is. A Prime Minister overseeing chaos, overwhelmed at every turn. He can't say when ambulances will get to heart attack victims again. He can't say when the prison system will keep streets safe again. He can't even deal with tax avoiders in his own cabinet. Is he starting to wonder if this job is just too big for him?
The German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has confirmed the supply of tanks to Ukraine and that Germany will authorise their re-export from other countries. Germany's agreed to provide 14 Leopard 2 tanks and has lifted its veto on allies sending their German-made vehicles. The United States is expected to pledge at least 30 Abrams tanks later, providing another boost to Ukraine's ability to counter a Russian spring offensive. The Kremlin, though, has described it as a blatant provocation and says Western tanks in Ukraine will burn like all the rest. The Met Police Commissioner says painful stories will emerge as work progresses to rid the force of hundreds of corrupt officers. Sir Mark Rowley apologised to the victims of former officer David Carrick, who pleaded guilty to 49 criminal charges, including 24 counts of rape. He says Carrick should not have been a police officer. He also says the force has failed to apply the same ruthlessness to guarding their own integrity as they have to confronting criminals.
I think we failed as investigators, where we should have been more intrusive and joined the dots over his repeated misogyny over decades. And as leaders, our mindset should have been more determined to spot and root out such a misogynist. So, as I say, I apologise to his victims, and I want to say sorry to all the women across London who feel let down by this and whose trust in policing is shaken by this.
Some breaking news just coming into us. Afghani asylum seeker and convicted triple killer Lawangin Abdul Ramazai has been sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 29 years. It's for the murder of the 21-year-old Thomas Roberts following an argument outside a Subway takeaway in Bournemouth. More on this story as and when we get it here at GB News. Meanwhile, a 14-year-old boy has been arrested after a teenage girl was stabbed at a school in Manchester. Officers were called to the Parswood High School yesterday afternoon. The girl was taken to hospital for the treatment of serious but not life-threatening injuries. Police are appealing for information. Amazon workers are striking for the first time in the UK in a dispute over pay. Around 300 staff at Amazon's Coventry warehouse are walking out in protest against a pay rise of 50 pence an hour, which the union has described as derisory. It is because of, they say, the severe conditions workers face. Amazon, though, says a tiny proportion of the workforce are involved and they're proud to offer competitive pay. However, a GMB union member says Amazon workers have had enough.
The pressure cooker environment that they work in anyway, with the targets that they're expected to reach, they just wear them out, get rid of them, replace them. After all that, they just offered a 50 pence pay increase in the biggest cost of living crisis that we've had in decades. And I think when workers have got nothing to lose, you see them coming out fighting.
And Scottish teachers are halfway through their 16-day strike action. Staff in both South Ayrshire and Edinburgh are walking out today. The unions claim the Scottish Government have little or no interest in resolving the dispute. The Government says the pay demands are not affordable. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens, but now it's back to Mark.
Aaron, thanks very much indeed, and welcome back to GB News Live. So, the Prime Minister acknowledging earlier at PMQs that he had not been given the full picture about the Tory chairman's financial affairs when he told MPs last week that Nadeem Zahawi had given a full account. In a spirited exchange today with Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer, Rishi Sunak suggesting it would have been politically expedient to sack Nadeem Zahawi, but insisting that due process meant the investigation into his tax affairs should be allowed to run its course.
Opposition can't have it both ways. The shadow leader, also his party chair, both urged me and the government to appoint an independent advisor. And now he objects to that independent advisor doing their job. It's simple political opportunism, and everyone can see through it.
His failure to sack him, when the whole country can see what's going on, shows how hopelessly weak he is. A Prime Minister overseeing chaos, overwhelmed at every turn. He can't say when ambulances will get to heart attack victims again. He can't say when the prison system will keep streets safe again. He can't even deal with tax avoiders in his own cabinet. Is he starting to wonder if this job is just too big for him?
Let's get more now from Downing Street and our political reporter Olivia Utley joining us now. Olivia, in Westminster, rather, Downing Street. But just to reflect on Downing Street, it's interesting that we've got these comments coming in from the Prime Minister's press secretary subsequent to that PMQ session. Obviously, the Prime Minister is fully focused on delivering the 5 promises made to the country. He may not sack Nadeem Zahawi, even if he's found to have breached the ministerial code. And then going on to say that they are unable to say whether there are more damaging surprises emerging about Nadeem Zahawi's tax affairs. There's a little bit of a different complexion arriving now on this.
Definitely, and of course we saw in PMQs a very marked change from Rishi Sunak's attitude last week, where he was essentially defending Nadeem Zahawi to the hilt. Now the substance of Sunak's defence of his own decision to appoint Nadeem Zahawi to the cabinet in the first place is that although yes, he was told by the Cabinet Office that questions had been raised about the chairman of the party's tax affairs, he'd been told that those problems had now been resolved and that he was free to appoint Nadeem Zahawi. Now that puts quite a lot of pressure on the Cabinet Office and in particular Simon Case. So it does feel as though this blame game has begun in Whitehall. But you can see from that statement from the press secretary that Rishi Sunak is still very much on the back foot on this issue. And the danger for him and his allies is that Labour is now going to turn this issue into a problem about Rishi Sunak's own tax affairs. And we know that that causes problems for the Prime Minister, as we saw with the non-dom status row which emerged last spring.
The point, of course, is that then, as you've indicated, the government has to firefight these things when it should be trying to move on with the big issues of all the industrial action, the NHS and all those other things. Indeed, as the Prime Minister's press spokesman saying, the 5 things that they wanted to get done.
Absolutely. And Rishi Sunak, when he came to office, promised that he would restore integrity to public life and focus on the issues which really matter to Britain. But in his not very long, few months in office, he's had a slew of mini scandal, as it were, on his own front benches. There was Suella Braverman being rehired after the leak allegations. There were Gavin Williamson issues he had to stand down. Dominic Raab is currently being investigated for bullying. And now we've got this issue with Nadeem Zahawi. And as Keir Starmer was at pains to point out, as he highlighted very neatly in Prime Minister's questions today, all of these issues take bandwidth away from the Prime Minister fighting the issues which, really matter to Britain. And we could see that with Keir Starmer choosing to focus his first few questions on the Zara Alina case, this horrific case which has gripped the country over the last week, and the awful state that the probation services are now in. And it was a very elegant way for the leader of the opposition to underline the problem for Rishi Sunak, which is that while he's focused on his own ministers, he can't govern the country effectively.
And of course, this is an occasion at PMQs when you can take the temperature, a litmus test, if you like, of what backbench support there is for a government. What do we make of today? I mean, they weren't in great voice, were they, the Tory backbenchers today?
no, they weren't in great voice. The time when Rishi Sunak was strongest and the time when he did have the most support was when he was defending his own decision to stick to due process. Now, I've heard murmurings on the Conservative backbenches over the last week or so that say that, a more experienced politician than Rishi Sunak, he hasn't been in Westminster for very long, remember, or a politician with more political nous would have got rid of Zahawi immediately and never mind the technicalities of the issue. But Sunak there was turning that political inexperience into a strength in saying that he is a man who sticks to due process. He was defending his decision to take it step by step, to play it by the book. And that was when he got the most support today.
Olivia, at Westminster, thank you very much indeed for updating us with that. And, of course, we'll see what emerges next Wednesday on the continuing story. Thank you very much indeed. Now, there was reference to at PMQs about the Convention of the North today, or at least the Trans-Pennine Rail route. Is levelling up just a slogan? Well, some living in the North are certainly seeming to think so, many criticising the Prime Minister for failing to fulfil the promises made by former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, you remember. A somewhat scathing report, indeed, released today from a think tank, the left-leaning Institute for Public Policy Research, suggesting major disparity between the North and South regions, with, quote, the UK standing out as the most regionally unbalanced, large, advanced economy. Well, joining us now, our economics and business editor Liam Halligan with On the Money. Liam, as we say, left-leaning, but some interesting material in here, which, of course, ties in with this Convention of the North, the meeting of politicians and business leaders and local administrations up in Manchester, and comparing the figures with OECD averages, particularly on production and wage levels and so on.
That's right, Mark. Afternoon. There's a big powwow going on in Manchester, sort of meeting of northern minds. Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove's there, as is his Labour shadow, Lisa Nandy. She actually comes from the north of England.
Unlike Michael Gove.
Unlike Michael Gove. Actually comes from Aberdeen. He comes from Aberdeen, though he is a Surrey MP, of course. Indeed. So the IPPR, left-leaning, respectable outfit. They don't make things up. They've done some proper research, been around for a long time. And what they're saying is if you treat the north of England as a country and compare it to the 38 advanced industrial countries in what we call the OECD, the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, only Greece has lower investment. You gave the quote there in the introduction. The IPPR, though, also talked about vast inequalities in the UK and systemic underinvestment in the north of England. This is a long-running theme. And, of course, whether or not the Tories can turn levelling up from just a slogan into a practical reality that generates jobs and growth, that will determine whether or not they can retain some of those red wall seats in the North East, in the North West, in the Midlands. Labour seats that the Tories had never won, but Boris Johnson did win them in 2019. And that's why levelling up is so important. And that's why, Mark, this site in Camas, in the north east of England, in Blythe, that is such a symbolic site now.
Just to touch on that, suggestions that there may be an Australian company starting to sniff around and looking at that site.
Indeed, we reported on GB News this morning. There is an Australian company called Recharge Industries. It's a start-up, but it has big financial backers. British Volt was also a start-up. Since 2019, it's been trying to raise money for this, what we call a gigafactory, a factory that makes these battery packs for electric vehicles. A £3.6 billion investment this is meant to be in Camas by the deep water port of Blythe. Lots of renewable energy coming in off the North Sea. A perfect site, really. This would be the biggest investment in the North East since the Japanese car-making giant Nissan transformed the region in the mid-80s into one of the UK's biggest car-making...
Nissan Qashqai, the country's best-selling car
hubs, of course, and it's one of the most productive car plants in Europe because those northeast engineers and manufacturers do have a very good reputation. But British Volt couldn't raise the private sector money to unlock £100 million of public sector money that's conditional. But Recharge Industries, an Aussie outfit, spearheaded, by the way, the go-between, apparently, is one bloke called Ian Botham, who knows all about, who's the UK-Australia trade envoy, now Lord Botham.
I thought it was the wine business that he was into.
He's in plenty of business. He spent all his career trying to get Aussies out. Now he's trying to get them back in again.
Very good. Yeah, okie doke, and hopefully not on a sticky wicket. But looking at the sort of storm clouds yet again gathering on economic forecasts, we've got this private submission, we're told, from the Office of Budget Responsibility to the Treasury. And we dial back and we remember the whole issue about Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss, where they hadn't gone to the OBR to get their estimates.
Yeah.
Now that they have provided them the Treasury, they suddenly said, whoops, we may have got it wrong. Suddenly Jeremy Hunt is being faced with the fact the cupboard's bare to get anything going for growth.
What's happening here, Mark, it's what you and I have been talking about pretty much every afternoon now since Christmas, right? There is a battle for hearts and minds over where the economy is. We had a positive GDP growth figure in November, massively against expectations. And then earlier this week, we were reporting that the Purchaser Managing Index, a sort of survey of opinion of business leaders, is plummeting. So nobody quite knows where the economy is going to go. We're now in the run-up to the March budget, which is going to be hugely contentious because you've got the likes of the Office of Budget Responsibility. You've got a lot of economists saying to the government, you really can't afford to do anything in terms of cutting taxes. You really can't afford to spend lots and lots of money to solve these strikes and give way on big public sector pay increases. We had, didn't we, just recently, the notion that maybe the government could spend money, but then these borrowing figures came out. 27 billion quid. We borrowed.
And the debt interest we have.
We borrowed in December alone, 17 billion of which was debt interest. So what the OBR are doing now ahead of the budget, which isn't yet until March, is they are trying to lay out the kind of intellectual terrain. They are trying to set the tone. The public finances are very, very, very tight, Chancellor. They're not doing this, under the radar. They're not passing him a note across the proverbial desk in Whitehall. They're doing this publicly on the front page of the newspapers.
And given that, what is your estimate as to what happens now? I mean, could we be seeing maybe March, the budget, just as a holding situation, and then in November, as we saw last year, another set of decisions having to be made to really try and be as flexible as possible?
There will be. We generally have. There's been lots of change in how we do our financial statements.
They call it,
We've generally settled down now. So there's. When we were kids, there was just a budget in March and that was it. And now there is an autumn statement. That's a fixed thing in the sort of fiscal policy-making calendar. Everyone expects it. It's accountants, financial markets and so on. I think it all depends, Mark. I genuinely believe the direction of travel from March onwards depends crucially on what happens between now and March. Will inflation keep coming down, right? I think it will. I said yesterday that there are some producer price index numbers coming out today. They've just come out. They are showing quite a steep fall now in the costs of firms' inputs that will feed through into headline inflation. Will we get some growth? Will we get the Bank of England raising interest rates sharply next Thursday, or will they go for a little bit less of a rise? All of these things will drive the forecast of growth. And if you can forecast growth, which the Bank of England isn't, but if private sector people can credibly forecast growth, the Chancellor can then look the nation in the eye and look his political opponents in the eye and say, oh, there's going to be a bit more growth, I've got a bit more room for manoeuvre, maybe I can spend a little bit more, and maybe I don't have to do that increase in corporation tax, which we said that we would. That's my outside bet.
19% and holding rather than going up to 25%.
Rather than 19% to 25%. That's what I'm pushing for, in my own little way.
Well, let's see if he listens to you. Thank you for the moment, Liam. That's to come, of course, in the days and weeks ahead. But let's reflect now that experts from academia, science and the preschool sector met the Princess of Wales at Windsor Castle today to discuss her work with early years child development. Now, this advisory group will provide advice and oversight of the Royal Foundation Centre for Early Childhood. That aims to promote the importance of the first 5 years of a child's life. Our royal reporter Cameron Walker has been following events in Windsor, can join us now. And Cameron, this is something very, very close, of course, to the Princess's heart and, of course, direct experience with their royal children themselves.
Yes, exactly. It's something the Princess has been working on for more than a decade, and it's all very much gearing up to a big major launch next week of a national campaign focused on early childhood development. And it's all about focusing on the research which shows that the first 5 years of a child's life can really impact their future chances. So, for example, if a child has a poor start in life, chances are mental health problems, unemployment, homelessness are much more likely. So Kate has gathered 8 experts at Windsor Castle today, really to try and start coming up with some kind of strategy to tackle this and bring it more into the public knowledge, as it were. And I spoke to Dr. Ellen Gregory, who is one of the experts who met the Princess of Wales today. He's president and founder of the Maternal Mental Health Alliance. And he tells me that the Princess really wants to focus on particularly the social and emotional development of children.
It is an enormous personal commitment from the Princess of Wales, and it is a highly well-informed, intelligent one. She really understands the science behind all of this and really is committed to making a big difference to everyone's lives.
Well, what's the state then of development for children in the UK? Well, according to Neil Leach from the the Early Years Alliance, not great. More than 5,000 early years providers in the last 12 months have been closed due to partly government funding problems. Now, the Royal Foundation has actually employed a former Downing Street Special Advisor, David Cameron, to lead this early years project with the Princess of Wales. It was launched in 2021 to raise awareness of the issues. The Princess has been to Denmark, I think she went last year or the year before, which is seen as a world leader of trying to really bring this to the forefront. And the Princess is hoping the knowledge she's gained there and gathering all these experts, she's really going to be able to make a difference. It's dubbed her legacy, and it's her Prince's Trust moment, referring to the then Prince of Wales, now King's work with inner city school children. So we'll have to wait and see to exactly what this national campaign is going to be next week.
OK. And should we draw any inference, Cameron, that this took place at Windsor? I mean, is this now going to be HQ for the Prince and Princess of Wales?
Well, Mark, they very much live on the Windsor Castle estate in Adelaide Cottage. They moved here in the summer, so they haven't moved directly into the castle, but I think they're very much seeing that as a base. But it is understood they still keep Kensington Palace as their offices and are there on a regular basis. But in terms of their private living, that's very much here in Windsor.
OK, Cameron, thank you very much indeed on updating us there with that latest initiative on those early years learning, if I can get that out. Now, let's reflect that coming up after this break, we'll have the latest on the first ever strike by Amazon staff at their warehouse in Coventry. What's bugging them? We'll be updating you in a moment after the weather.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway...
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, we've been updating, of course, all these public sector strikes, the NHS particularly. Now, hundreds of Amazon workers going on strike for the first time in the UK. They, too, in a dispute over pay. Well, members of the GMB union, working at the company's so-called fulfilment centre in Coventry, holding the industrial action as they demand a rise. I mean, some big increases, of course, in the cost of living. The union balloted the workers back in December after they claimed to have been offered a pathetic 50 pence an hour increase. The firm making some £204 million in profit here in 2021. Let's get more now with our West Midlands reporter Jack Carson joining us from Coventry. And Jack, I guess much like the public sector union strikes, it's not just about the pay particularly, but the working conditions, with many saying, you know, they really are not having even a chance to have a loo break when they're working for Amazon.
That's exactly right, Mark. Of course, we've seen a lot of public sector workers striking over pay, over working conditions. This is what really makes this strike so significant, is that this is now industrial action within the private sector. But you're also right. They're offered a 50p pay rise. That was rejected by employees here and by members of the GMB union here, but also conditions as well that they feel like some workers saying here that they feel like they're constantly being watched, and that any time they take away, whether that's for loo breaks, away from their station near the conveyor belt to go help with pallets and things, is all time which is then wanted to be worked back. And they feel like actually the robots, some people have been saying, are actually treated better than the workers here. But earlier on, I spoke to senior organiser for the GMB, Amanda Gearing, and this is what she had to say about the strikes.
This is about pay. They've been through the pandemic. They've put up with the pressure cooker environment that they're working in, and then it come to giving them a pay rise, and they were offered 50 pence, and they said enough is enough. You know, they've got nothing left to lose, to be honest, trying to live on £10.50. You know, they've just said, no, we're not doing that, and that's where the strike action has come from. This is massive. I mean, you know, we haven't had workers rise up like this in any Amazon across the UK, and I think it just shows the sense of feeling, if I'm honest. And it started here in Coventry, but this is not where it's going to end. We can see this happening across the country. It's the environment now. People can't live with the cost of living crisis as it is, and then warehouses like Amazon that are earning billions and billions of pounds paying our members a pittance. It's just not good enough.
And in response to these strikes, an Amazon spokesperson has said that we appreciate the great work our teams do throughout the year, and we're proud to offer competitive pay, which starts at the minimum of between £10.50 and £11.45 per hour, depending on the location, and that this represents a 29% increase in the minimum hourly wage for Amazon employees since 2018, and that employees are also offered comprehensive benefits, along with, of course, that what they say is a proud and competitive pay offer. But of course, this industrial action is started here. It might not end here. Of course, there are other members of the GMB within Amazon warehouses around the UK, so it might have started here in Coventry, but it might not end here either.
Indeed. Jack, thank you very much indeed for joining us with the braziers burning brightly there on the picket line behind you in Coventry. Thanks very much indeed. Now, Metropolitan Police Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley has told the London Assembly today that rooting out corrupt police officers won't be rapid and will be painful. Well, this comes after former PC David Carrick, of course, pleaded guilty to some 49 sexual offences and was sacked from the force last week. Let's go live now to the London Assembly, where our reporter Ellie Costello can join us. And Ellie, this is a pretty stark assessment from the Chief Constable, isn't it?
Well, it was an absolutely stunning admission
from the head of the Metropolitan Police this morning when he said that 2 to 3 officers are in court every single week at the moment facing criminal charges. I mean, that really does put it into perspective, doesn't it? And shows us just how vast this problem is. And it also shows us that this very difficult chapter that the Metropolitan Police is in right now will continue and will continue for a very long time. That's what Sir Mark Rowley admitted this morning, that there would be many more of these cases to come, unfortunately. And the timing of this was very significant because just minutes before this hearing started here this morning at Assembly Hall, we heard about the latest of these crimes, and this is by PC Hussein Chihab. He pled guilty to child sex offences yesterday. He was actually placed and posted in a school in Enfield, and he admitted yesterday to 4 counts of sexual activity with a girl between the ages of 13 and 15, 3 counts of making indecent photographs of a child and of sexual communication with a child as well. Now, he will be sentenced in March. The Met have said there's no evidence to suggest that any of this criminality is linked to his role at the school. And they also say he had been vetted, but because those crimes hadn't yet been reported to the police, that of course it didn't flag up on their systems. But this is just the latest in a series of crimes that we've heard about serving Metropolitan Police officers. And this is what Sir Mark Rowley had to say about this latest.
Concerns me greatly, and it must you, that things are going to come out more and more the more you look at. And we look at today's ghastly reporting on PC Hussein Chihab, who admits 4 counts of sexual activity with a girl aged 13 to 15. And then we find out that he had a role as a safer schools officer. Do you want to comment on that particular case?
No, it's another ghastly case, isn't it?
Yes.
From what we've seen so far, it does look like his vetting had been done. The sexual contact offences took place before he joined the police, but sadly they weren't known. And then whilst he was in the police, he was taking part in what you might sort of broadly describe as grooming activity. It is ghastly, and it's going to be really, obviously you've got to apologise to the victims. They shouldn't be facing that at the hands of a police officer.
And Ellie, yet another question, of course, about therefore vetting procedures. And after the David Carrick and Wayne Couzens cases, they've got this job now of how do they actually restore public faith and trust in the police service?
Yes, of course, Mark, and that's not going to be an easy feat, is it? And Mark Rowley was today speaking about that vetting process, saying that that needs to be looked at. That's one of his priorities at the moment, to overhaul that vetting process and make sure that nobody is in the police force who shouldn't be. And he did admit there are hundreds of police officers currently within the Metropolitan Police that simply shouldn't be a police officer, which is another stunning admission, to be honest with you. But yes, these cases of Wayne Couzens and David Carrick that have become synonymous with violence against women, almost symbolic to the threat that many people believe the Metropolitan Police could have towards women. And that worry is held by so many people across London now. But it must be said that Sir Mark Rowley was very open and transparent about this. He's called it appalling criminality of David Carrick, and he said he reiterated his apologies to those victims as well. He said building trust will take a very long time. He will drain this swamp, but it is going to look a lot worse before it feels any better.
Yeah. Ellie, thank you very much indeed on updating us there with that hearing at the London Assembly. Thanks very much indeed. Now, been another surge in those small boats crossing the English Channel today. People smugglers taking advantage, it seems, of a break in the weather conditions. The latest coming up with our man, as ever, at Dover, Mark White. But first, let's get an update on all the headlines with Aaron.
Hi there, it's 25 to 3. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has resisted calls to sack the Conservative Party chairman at a heated PMQs this afternoon. Rishi Sunak says due process should be followed and an investigation into Nadeem Zahawi's tax affairs ought to be allowed to reach its conclusion. It comes after it's been revealed Mr Zahawi paid a tax penalty while serving as Chancellor. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has accused Mr Sunak of being hopelessly weak and unsuitable for the job. But the Prime Minister told the Commons no issues were raised when he appointed Mr Zahawi and accused Sir Keir of playing petty politics.
The shadow leader, also his party chair, both urged me and the government to appoint an independent advisor. And now he objects to that independent advisor doing their job.
He can't even deal with tax avoiders in his own cabinet.
Yeah.
Is he starting to wonder if this job is just too big for him?
Germany's confirmed it will supply tanks to Ukraine and will authorise their re-export from other countries. Germany will provide 14 Leopard 2 tanks and has lifted the veto on allies sending their German-made vehicles too. And later, the United States is expected to pledge at least 30 of its advanced battle tanks. The Kremlin has responded, saying it's a blatant provocation and that Western tanks in Ukraine will burn like all the rest. The Met Police Commissioner says 2 or 3 officers will be facing criminal court appearances every week, and the public should prepare for painful stories to emerge as the force attempts to root out hundreds of corrupt officers. Sir Mark Rowley apologised to the victims of former officer David Carrick, who pleaded guilty to 49 criminal charges, including 24 counts of rape. He says Carrick should not have been a police officer. The Afghani asylum seeker and convicted triple killer Lawangin Abdul Rahimzai has been sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 29 years. He was found guilty of the murder of the 21-year-old Thomas Roberts earlier this week after an argument involving an e-scooter outside a takeaway in Bournemouth. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Now, there's been another surge in small boat crossings underway in the English Channel today. And this comes as those people smuggling gangs are taking advantage of a break in the weather. Our sources confirming at least 350 people now in several boats have actually been turned back, but then reaching UK waters. Our sources telling us more than 1,000 could be trying to cross tomorrow, perhaps, with a break in the weather window. Let's get the very latest in Dover with our Home and Security editor, Mark White, monitoring the position there for us. And Mark, you were saying this is obviously changing hour by hour according to those sea conditions.
Yes, and on that weather window, it's actually closing back up rapidly this afternoon, so there will be no crossings tomorrow. So those that the people smugglers want to try to push off the coastline of France are going to have to do it within the next couple of hours because they are rapidly losing that weather window. But of course, we know that the criminal gangs, it's a highly lucrative trade. They are patient. They've been doing this now for some 4 years, so they're expert at reading the wind and the tide, and if it's not good today, then they'll wait. We're expecting another weather window perhaps at the weekend and more coming across them. What we know for sure today, Mark, is that 7 small boats have been intercepted in UK waters by Border Force. 350 people taken off these boats and taken here to the processing centre at Dover Harbour. In addition to that, several other small boats out in the channel trying to make that crossing into UK waters. But what often happens is, you know, with the fast-running tides, the fuel on board these tiny inflatables, sometimes they don't make it. And we know that several boats that have been in the water, they've been shadowed by French vessels who have a policy of not intercepting and trying to turn back the small boats. They say that would be too dangerous to do that, so instead they shadow at a safe distance, and if those boats get into trouble, they intervene to help those on board. But 3 of these boats, I think at least, have now turned back, heading back to France. And in addition to that, Mark, there was an incident in which 2 small boats were in the process of trying to be launched by the criminal gangs near Calais. French police managed to get to the scene, intervene quickly, puncture those boats, and those migrants who were about to get onto the boats scarpered back into the dunes. So it's still ongoing. It's a busy day. We might not get 1,000 crossing today, but we're certainly going to get more than 350, I'd imagine, by the end of today.
OK, Mark, thanks very much indeed, bringing us once more that latest picture at Dover. And, of course, we'll keep monitoring that as the day progresses. Thanks very much indeed. Now, Lamangin Abdulrahim Ziai has been sentenced for killing 21-year-old Thomas Roberts outside a sandwich shop in Bournemouth last year during an argument over an e-scooter. He'd stabbed Roberts with a knife hidden in his trousers, previously admitting manslaughter, but the jury took 12 hours to find him guilty of murder with a majority verdict. Let's get more with our South West of England reporter Jeff Moody, who's been following the case at Salisbury Crown Court. And I gather, Jeff, that much said by the judge in his summing up before passing sentence.
Yes, absolutely. The judge said in his summing up, Thomas Roberts did nothing wrong that night. He was simply unlucky enough to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. He went on to address the mitigating circumstances, as he called it. He said that Lamangin Abdulrahim Ziai would have suffered trauma earlier in life. There can be no doubt, said the judge, of the effects of the horrors of growing up in Afghanistan. I accept, he said, that his past life experiences have left him very damaged, affected how he reacts to some situations. This does have some effect on his culpability, but only, said the judge, to a small extent. Extreme violence is always wholly unjustified. The judge said he went out seeking trouble with a knife in his belt. The 26-second argument that led to his tragedy was entirely of his own making. Well, earlier on, Simon Huxter, the senior investigating officer, gave us this statement.
Thoughts are with the family and loved ones of Thomas Roberts, and I want to thank them for the dignified way that they have conducted themselves throughout the investigation and court proceedings. I would also like to thank all those from Dorset Police and the prosecution team who have worked tirelessly to achieve justice for Tommy and his family. Tommy's family and loved ones have suffered an unspeakable loss as a result of this horrific incident involving a knife. If anyone out there believes that someone is in a possession of a knife or offensive weapon, please contact the police immediately. Matters relating to the defendant's background and previous convictions have been shared with relevant agencies to ensure appropriate reviews are carried out and areas for learning identified. However, my focus and that of my teams for the last 9 months has been to gather the evidence relating to the brutal murder of Tommy and ensure that his killer has been brought to justice.
Well, earlier on, just before the sentencing, we heard from the victims. They had their statement read out in court. The family said what a wonderful son Thomas was. In particularly moving was the girlfriend who described living now as being trapped in an endless cycle of disbelief. Well, he was sentenced to 29 years minimum term. That's a life sentence.
Very much indeed for bringing us all those latest details in that sentencing at Salisbury Crown Court. Thank you very much indeed. Terrible case, of course. Now, let's reflect on what appears to be a spectacular U-turn by the German government. The Chancellor Olaf Scholz announcing its decision to permit the export of some 14 Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine, in the wake of some criticism from Western allies, particularly the United States. Speaking to German MPs just over an hour ago, he said, "We have to coordinate with our partners and allies." However, some MPs said that the move overthrew the principles of post-war German politics, of course, not to get involved in military matters. Meanwhile, Russia warning Germany, saying it was an extremely dangerous decision, taking the conflict to a new level. Let's get more now with former Defence Attaché Colonel Simon Diggins joining us. And Simon, it also now appears that the United States will take the decision to supply these Abrams tanks as well. Not quite the 300 that President Zelensky was looking for, but nevertheless, when you add the Challengers, Leopard 2s and these Abrams tanks, it's something for perhaps the Kremlin to reflect on.
I think it will be. I mean, they are now in a position where we can properly equip the Ukrainians to have a distinct battlefield advantage over the Russians. But the difficulty we have got, there is something about the numbers. So President Zelensky is correct. All those tanks are welcome. All of them are valuable. All of them will be useful in terms of fighting the Russians. But there is an important requirement to make sure there's enough of them there to have a decisive effect. And that's going to be important.
Why are these tanks so important, though? Because very early on in this conflict, we saw how quickly, for instance, the Russian armour was knocked out, although obviously a lot of them Soviet-era T-72s and so on. And at that time, some military strategists were saying, well, you know, this shows actually that the tank is no longer suitable for modern warfare.
No, I think that with all these things, you have to see the tank as part of a package. So you need the tank, you need the infantry armoured fighting vehicles, you need air defence, you need the whole thing to be working together. If you have them all working together, then the relative advantages, perhaps and also the relative weaknesses of tanks can then be mitigated by other people, other bits of the system. Tanks by themselves are very powerful, but as you say, they could be vulnerable to top attack or some form of attack. If, however, they're also then protected by infantry, they can protect the infantry and vice versa. So it's the overall package that's important, rather than just the tanks by themselves. And that will also be critical.
And the key question, which of course has exercised the politicians, as to whether they'll be seen as a defensive or offensive weapon.
I mean, I've heard the argument, and I don't really understand it. And I suppose as a professional militaryman, I probably don't. Offensive, defensive depends on what you do with them. I mean, all the NATO tanks, interestingly, were originally devised to defend us against what was going to be seen as mass Soviet or then potentially mass Russian attacks. So very much they have got some of those characteristics. So they've got very heavy armour on them. They're heavier than the T-74s and T-64s. And then subsequently they've been updated with things like reactive armour and everything that goes with that as well. So, I mean, defensive is about what you do with them, and same with offensive. It's how you use them is important, not necessarily what their original design characters. But as I say, there is a slight irony in that all of the NATO tanks were originally designed to defend against mass Soviet and then Russian attack, rather than the other way around.
Yeah, going back to that sort of Cold War war gaming. However, obviously the need is pressing because they're saying that at least the American intelligence sources saying they suspect the Russians will try and launch some major counteroffensive now in the spring.
Yeah, I think that's unfortunately exactly correct. I mean, the whole purpose of the mobilisation last year was about creating additional force for Putin. I mean, he basically worked out, and his generals sort of worked out, that whatever they were trying to do last autumn and summer, they'd run out of energy, they'd run out of time. They could defend, they could do local counterattacks, but they couldn't make a significant difference. Hence the need to go and mobilise. What that's created for him is effectively another offensive organisation. Let's call it 300, 400,000. Let's call it a core, which gives him options. He could just use those to defend what he's already held, or he has an opportunity perhaps to do something offensive down through Belarus or wherever, and try and finally achieve a decisive result. So that is absolutely correct.
So not over yet. Simon, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on GB News. Thank you. Now, Scotland celebrating Burns Night tonight, of course. Haggis, neeps, tatties, poetry and maybe a wee dram or two, acknowledging the life and legacy of Scottish poet Rabbie Burns. Well, whiskey certainly making the Burns supper table as the accompaniment. Although perhaps some say don't put whiskey and ice together, it ruins it. Anyway, no Burns celebration truly complete without something washing down the haggis. Joining us now, Sam Brooks, whiskey expert and founding director of whiskey trader Vintage Acquisitions. Just on that, Sam, what was your view? The purists say don't put ice in there, just have it in a little sherry glass and a bit of water just to release all the floral scents and so on.
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. I mean, I'm a strong believer in have your whiskey how you like it. Whether you like it neat or a drop of water or with ice, however you like it and enjoy it, that's the right way.
Now, as we say, you're a whiskey trader. We can see some bottles there behind you in what looks like a very secure cage. That's the other aspect, that people have been not just buying it to enjoy, but it's become a major source of investment, isn't it?
That's correct. Yeah, it's over the last sort of 5 to 10 years, it's become incredibly popular as an investment vehicle. We've seen investors moving from traditional investments of ISAs, bonds, stocks and shares into tangible assets, something that they can get a bit of enjoyment from, really. And whiskey's been doing incredibly well.
Yeah, and I think people have been not just buying the old bottles, but the casks as well. That's been an investment, particularly from Japanese buyers.
Absolutely, yeah, that's what we specialise in. So we're cask traders, and we trade casks to private individuals and other companies all over the world. And the thing is with buying whiskey in a cask is that whiskey by its pure nature can't help but improve the longer it's held in the cask.
Yeah.
So over the years, it becomes scarcer and rarer, but it improves dramatically. And that just pushes the price up naturally.
Yeah, because, of course, once it's in the bottle, it doesn't age anymore. And the angel shares, they say, obviously, that disappears into the air. But I think, some bottles have been getting towards, £300,000 or more. I mean, if you actually opened that, God forbid, and tasted it, could you really tell the difference between that and something you just went to get off the supermarket shelves?
Well, I'd love the opportunity to find out. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. The most expensive bottle ever sold was a 1926 Macallan that sold for just one single bottle for 1.5 million at auction. So yeah, incredible amount of money. But my palate isn't that sophisticated, so probably not. Might be wasted on me.
OK. And the other aspect, of course, as people prepare maybe to enjoy Burns Night tonight, is whether you just have a blended whiskey or if you're going for a malt, do you have something, peaty from the West Coast or whatever, or do you stay with the Speyside? What do you go for?
Great question. I would say with regards to having it with haggis, personally, I would have something slightly sherried from the Speyside region would be a great match.
Oh, Glenmorangie, something like that, maybe?
Something along those lines, yeah, absolutely.
Right.
I mean, Speyside is so densely populated with amazing distilleries that, and many of them specialise in the sherry cask whiskey that you won't go far wrong.
Dufftown, Glenlivet, whatever, yes. Others are available, of course. But thank you very much indeed, and enjoy your haggis and neeps and tatties and a wee dram tonight as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
But as we say, drink responsibly, view responsibly, as you have done, of course, joining us here on GB News Live. Thanks for being with us. I'm back at 12 tomorrow, but don't go anywhere because coming up, Patrick is next with you until 6. Before that, we'll update you on the weather. What's going to be happening on Burns Night? Here are the details.
Hello, welcome to the latest from the Met Office. I'm Annie Shuttleworth. This evening will be a chilly one with plenty of clear spells that will remain quite cloudy across southern areas. Now we've got a cold weather front that's pushing southwards across the country throughout Wednesday and into Thursday. Much clearer weather behind it, but ahead of it staying quite misty and murky. And you can see that rain and drizzle affecting more southern areas of England throughout Wednesday evening, bringing outbreaks of rain. However, it'll be much drier elsewhere across the country, though a few showers will push into far northern areas of Scotland as well as parts of Northern Ireland. A chillier one for northern areas, as low as -3 or 4 in rural areas, but slightly milder start to the day on Thursday across the south than recent days. It'll be a relatively fine and dry day through much of Thursday, the best of the sunshine affecting western areas of the country, West Wales, western areas of Scotland and Northern Ireland, seeing hardly a cloud in the sky. A bit cloudier across the east with the odd shower. But for all of us, temperatures will be around average for the time of year, around 7 or 8 degrees. Overnight on Thursday night, a widespread frost will develop once again for western areas of Wales and much of Scotland and Northern Ireland, where it will be particularly cold across Northern Ireland, as low as -6 or 7 by the time we get to Friday morning. Where we've got a little more cloud across central and eastern areas of the country, we should stay relatively frost-free. And through Friday, another quite settled day, plenty of dry weather and some decent sunshine here and there, a bit more sunshine in the east than Thursday. But we'll see a little bit more cloud arriving into the northwest, which will become a bit of a theme as we head through the weekend.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Everybody, you're with me, Patrick Christie's on GB News. Coming up, GB News can exclusively reveal that hundreds of migrants have attempted to cross the Channel to the UK today. Around 350 people on as many as 7 boats have made it to shore as criminal gangs take advantage of a break in the bad weather. We will cross live to Dover to speak to our Home and Security editor, Mark White. The news comes as an Afghan asylum seeker and convicted triple killer who posed as a child to enter the UK is sentenced to life imprisonment. We spoke a lot about that yesterday. That sentence has come through. He's got a minimum term of 29 years after murdering an aspiring Royal Marine outside a Subway takeaway shop. Shocking stuff, that, from start to finish, isn't it? Also this hour, serious doubts over the reputation of our police as the Commissioner of the Met claims 2 or 3 of his officers are expected to appear in court every single